Great. Welcome everyone to the Future Ready Scholar Conference, day 2 of this 2-day event. It's really exciting to have everyone here. I'm just going to do a quick test to make sure the YouTube Live is working well. Future Ready Scholar Conference. Yeah, looks like everything is set up correctly. So welcome everyone. You're welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat if you would like, where you're at, what your role is, and so on. And throughout this event, if you didn't join yesterday, I'll just go over the logistics. You're welcome to post any questions in the chat. We'll kind of be proctoring it and going through it as we go through the event. So you don't always have to wait until the end of a talk to ask something. But at the end of every talk, we will hopefully always have time for your questions and get as many answered as possible. So today we have a very full schedule, so I'm just going to jump into it to make sure we get as much as we can out of today. So today we have basically 3 talks. So I'll actually be starting out the day with just a brief 30-minute, or at this point, probably more like 25-minute presentation on literature review. So this will be a very ground level literature review talk. We'll get into it in just a minute. And then 2 other talks today that are both very applicable and actionable for day-to-day research, particularly for graduate students as well as more senior academics or researchers applying their work in other areas, industry, and so on. So the first one will be the PhD plan, which is a great, it'll be a great presentation going over strategies for success, well-being, collaboration, and planning, all of that in the PhD process. And the second talk will be, or rather the third, will be about digital notes. And notes are probably the most underrated and powerful way to transform how we do research. There's a lot of potential in them that many people aren't aware of, and we'll have a presentation on really clear strategies how to take that to the next level using modern tools, of course. And then we'll wrap it up with some conclusions at the end of the day. So because I have such limited time, I'd love to dive into the literature review presentation. And as a reminder, if anyone didn't join yesterday or you're very new to the event, this is the Future Ready Scholar Conference by Litmaps. And so since it's by Litmaps, this is a presentation that's all about Litmaps. So this is our time to allow you to learn about our tool. Of course, we are hosting this event, but that doesn't mean that, this is the most important tool or presentation, not by any means. It's more that we are hosting this to provide a variety of resources, a variety of hopefully really high value information, tools, ideas, methods. And we definitely believe that Litmaps can be part of that. So if you are new to Litmaps, or perhaps you're a little bit familiar with the tool, but not too advanced yet, then I'd love to just introduce to you first what is really we're tackling when we look at Litmaps, and that's literature review. So that's why this whole talk, as brief as it'll be all about accelerating the literature review process. Just to recap, especially because I know we might have some graduate students, maybe even some undergraduates here, some people more new to the literature review process. So I just want to touch base on what does that process look like, why does it matter, and so on. So literature review, this is the first part of most any research project, any research endeavor, right? It's understanding what's out there, what papers exist, what topics exist, how do they all connect, and finding this network and how do we insert our new idea here? How do we spot, say, a research gap? How do we introduce our work into the field? So literature review is really important. You can't really get away without doing it. And it has mainly these key steps in the process. So defining a clear research question or topic, searching for all the relevant literature in the field. That can be something very simple if your topic is really novel, or it can be thousands of papers if your topic is very broad or something that's well researched. Evaluating the sources. So just because you're finding a paper on the topic doesn't mean you're probably going to use that in your final review or your final paper. There's many things we have to look for when we're evaluating whether an article is really relevant and really, say, trustworthy. And then, of course, we need to get to reading. So although we talked about a lot of awesome AI tools and methods in this conference so far, and we'll keep talking about them, there's still not really a replacement for reading. So I think most researchers, maybe you would agree, we still need to be reading and analyzing these papers, actually going through them and understanding them, and hopefully using different softwares to help expedite that process. And of course, literature review requires managing lots of papers. You want to stay organized, keep track of might be dozens, hundreds, even thousands of papers. And finally, writing it all up and referencing your sources appropriately. But if you've done a literature review, then you'll know that this is not so straightforward. These things often get jumbled and mixed around, so you often might jump between these different steps. You might be reading the literature and realizing you need to reevaluate your research question, or you might be starting to write something up and, oh, I need to find some additional sources. So we often jump around a lot, and that can be just one of the challenges with literature review process. But there are many other hardships, difficulties, and issues that come up because this can be such a lengthy and intimidating process. So I already see a crying face in the chat, which is indicative of the fact that, yeah, it can be a bit tiring. And I'd love to just pause for maybe it's just 20, 30 seconds and hear from everyone. If you want to drop in the YouTube live chat, yeah, what's like the biggest challenge that you usually have when you're doing a literature review, or perhaps if you haven't started one yet, what are you most concerned about or find most difficult? And even if you are a more senior researcher, this can still be relevant, right? Because even as we get more advanced or more familiar with the field, we're still dealing with lots of papers. We're still dealing with lots of literature. So there's different challenges that come along the way, no matter where you are in the academic path. So you're welcome to kind of share with us and share with the other folks and researchers in the chat, whatever you think is really the hardest part of the literature review process when you're tackling one yourself. And so I'm getting some responses coming in. I think because of some internet, of course, there's a lag. So thank you for your patience as I slowly get your responses here. But some are saying, right, to find the most relevant schools of thought is a big challenge, narrowing down the literature, determining what to read, not missing key references, defining that relevant question, organizing, remembering what you read. So remembering what you read, definitely keep that in the back of your mind because the second talk today, the note-taking talk, that's going to be really useful for that. Going through mountains of potential candidate papers for review and on and on and on. You guys are dropping in a lot of really good specific challenges you have with the process. Thank you so much for sharing this. I actually want to go through it in great detail at the end because this is exactly what we try to help alleviate with Litmaps, and knowing the key challenges and always studying that and keeping in touch with it is really helpful for us. So you guys have definitely hit, I think, most of the challenges I have here, as well as many, many more specific issues you have. So, and for example, if one person said, is the review critical enough? So say the paper, is my review comprehensive enough, or is that paper I'm evaluating, is that paper high enough quality and reliable? There's so many things here. And so the goal of Litmaps is to try and address all these different challenges and to make the whole literature review process easier. So, for example, when it comes to how overwhelming it can be, just the process of getting through literature, we try to have a really streamlined search strategy. And for reading papers, finding the most targeted ones, being able to connect those visually, and that's where Litmap comes in. That means literature map. So by using the visualization of how literature is connected, we can target and identify papers faster. And missing papers that someone specifically called out in the chat as well. This is one of the things that's very easy to do with Litmaps. I don't know if I'll have time to demo this exactly today, but it's very simple because we're searching based on papers we already know. So it's very easy to take a set of papers, put it in and be like, hey, what am I missing from this set? This is like a Litmaps core feature. And of course, staying up to date, so monitoring or making alerts based on the papers you already know. These are all things we try to do in the Litmaps app. And this is showing all the different steps that we try to help make faster, easier, or more productive using the application. So basically everything except for writing. Writing, we don't have any features for yet, but all the other steps here, you can use Litmaps for. So I have, maybe I will say about 15 minutes to go through this demonstration of Litmaps. And then hopefully I can leave at least 5 minutes or so for questions and to switch over to the next speaker. But for this brief time, I'd love to welcome you to follow along if you'd like. So if you're at a desktop, computer, laptop, then feel free to hop onto your web browser, go to app.litmaps.com. I'll actually put it in the chat right now so everyone can easily access it. And you can create a free account. It takes literally about 20 seconds. You just need your email, or you can log in through Google and then confirming your account, and that's it. And a free account is much more, there's much more access than if you just use our guest platform. So if you want to follow along right now, then you'll want to first create the free account and then proceed with the rest of the steps. Otherwise, you're welcome to try this out later when you have time, or whenever. You can also watch this hopefully in future recordings and follow along as well. But often, we say that the best way to learn is to often do. So even if you walk away thinking, actually, I don't really need a literature review tool, at least you now have the familiarity to know this is what you can expect when you use Litmaps. And probably most relevantly, although I can show you all of this, it's only going to be relevant if it's relevant for your topic. And as I touched on briefly yesterday, when it comes to the Litmaps database, we have a very big corpus. It's like 270 million. Maybe by now it's a much bigger number, but 270 million plus articles. It's very big and with pretty dispersed coverage, but that doesn't mean 100% that your field is 100% perfectly covered. So the best way always to evaluate it is to run it yourself on your specific topics, your research domains, and see, are the results satisfactory? Are you getting the papers you're expecting to get and finding lots of connections? So hopefully I gave just now about 30 seconds a minute to set up a free account. And then I will go ahead and just get started with this kind of simple tutorial of how we can use Litmaps for a literature review, really from start to finish. But you can also always start in the middle or at any other point, or check in on existing reviews or existing research libraries you already have. Great. So to get started, once you've made your free account and you're in the app, we just start by searching for some keywords. So this is assuming you're maybe starting a literature review from scratch. A lot of you probably have already far along in this journey, but just to give a simple idea here, we can just start with our research topic, our research question, or using really good targeted keywords on that topic. But we can also start even with an article you already know. So if your advisor, colleague, peer has a paper that they're like, this is a great paper, it's going to be relevant to the topic, you can immediately start with this paper. And of course, as a side note, you can also upload articles and start with those, which I can touch on briefly at the end, if there's any questions about that. But these are kind of the three main ways to start. The simplest being just searching for that topic, searching for some keywords. And this is the very first step, probably the first step in any app that you're going to use for a literature review, whether it's an AI automated app or even just a normal search database. And once we've found this, we've identified, okay, this is a topic I'm looking at. Here I just made an example of algae degradation of microplastics. I typed it in the search bar, hit enter, and I'm going to get my results. Now, these results are going to be kind of the same things you're going to see if you're, say, on a tool that's kind of like Google Scholar, Google Scholar, Semantic Scholar, different search databases, right? This is like going to be the full list of all the relevant papers. You're going to get many, many results, but we're not worried about getting into the weeds of these results. Our main goal here is to identify just one, or if you want, more than one relevant paper. And that's how we can stick to a simple search strategy. We don't need to immediately get bogged down by, oh my gosh, there's dozens of papers on my topic. We can just find one, two, three, however many you're seeing here in the results, and identifying them and creating their lit map. So usually what I recommend to look for is the title relevance, of course. So we're looking at the titles here. This first one already, you can see there's a lot of relevant keywords. The topic is relevant to what I'm searching for. And if I click on that title, I can also even read that paper in more detail just to be 100% sure, okay, it's actually really relevant. If you click on the title of papers in Litmaps, you're taken to their source page. You can see it in more detail. But the second most important thing to look at, and this is really specific to Litmaps, but very relevant just for any literature review search, so any tool or database you're using, to always keep in mind this count of references and citations. So this is very important in Litmaps in particular because we search based on connectedness. So if your paper that you're starting your search with, perhaps it came out recently and has 0 citations, which means no other articles have cited it yet, then it can still be relevant, but it's not going to really help you explore the literature, right? It only is going to have references, which is still useful, but the best thing if you're completely new to a topic, if possible, is trying to look for a paper that's relevant, on brand with the title, but also having a good citation count, right? So this is something we tend to look at when we are starting a review, when we're looking at the very first papers to get involved with. And of course, also the date. So that comes down more to your topic. So if you are researching something and you're thinking about, what's happening in the last 10 years, then make sure to, also consider in the back of your mind the dates that you're seeing. So here in this example, I found these 2 relevant papers right away in the top results. I click on each of them. And if I use more than one, I just want to use this button at the top that says Explore Related Articles. And if you just found one relevant paper, then for that paper, you can just click its button, Explore Related Articles. And that's all you need to do to create this article's lit map. And the lit map, of course, is, now we're getting into the real bread and butter of Litmaps itself, of literature maps. And this is really the whole point of the app. This is where we always want to get to. So we don't want to get too bogged down again by that big list of papers. We want to, as quickly as possible, start exploring the literature from a relevant starting point. So sometimes also you might hear people call these seed papers, like a seed that you plant in the ground and this becomes your tree of research. These seed papers are our starting points. And from here, Litmaps will generate the most relevant articles based on this connectedness through the citation network. I'll make a brief pause because I got a great question. What is a good number of citations on Litmaps? So presumably, if we're thinking about step 1 here, we're thinking about, I'm brand new to a topic. I want to find the very first paper to dive into and to explore the literature from. Then, we want to consider, okay, I want to hopefully find something that's actually pretty well cited, something that's really made an impact on the field. Now, when it comes to specific numbers, that can be always pretty tricky because depending on your field, an important paper might have thousands of citations, right? The most famous computer science papers and medical papers, they have thousands, even tens of thousands of citations. But for most research topics, we're actually looking at more niche things, right? You tend to get very niche eventually in whatever it is you're doing. So I wouldn't be too attached to the number, but making sure that it's high enough to where there's going to be other relevant recommendations. So for example, the second paper I have here, it just has 3 citations. If I use that alone, that's not going to be the best entry point into the literature. So at least I used both of these as inputs. And so altogether, that's giving me some 35 citations to go off of. So again, hard to give a concrete number, but you definitely, I would say maybe double digits if I had to put a specific number, but it's going to really depend on your field. So here we have the 2 starting articles. These are the ones I picked out in gray. And these hollow dots are the recommended articles based on the top connected Litmaps algorithm. And so the next step is just to go through these recommendations, just to start exploring the literature. And the difference here is we don't need to go through that very long list. Instead, we're already targeting the literature through the map and through the most relevant connected papers. And the power of the visualization is that not only is it showing me connections, so the lines show how papers are connected via citations or references, but they're also organized on the map visually based on certain attributes. So on your map, if anyone has created a map so far and you've managed to go through this process and you've made your own map, on the x-axis, you will have the date of publication. So the articles get more and more and more recent from left to right, and they have higher and higher citation counts on the y-axis. So that often means if we're diving into a topic for the first time, we often bring our eyes to the top left of the lit map because tends to be the highest cited work, more historic, more salient, high impact articles that have made a contribution on the field. And they're often a good kind of overarching place to start. On the flip side, if we're going towards the bottom right here, then we're seeing more recent articles. Obviously, they have less citations, but they're also relevant to the topic. They're showing up because they're interconnected. Okay, and because I have about 5-10 minutes left and we still have quite a few steps, I'm going to go through these next steps relatively quickly, and that way I can hopefully allow time for your questions. So next, as we're going through this process, we're looking at these recommendations and we can read and evaluate these papers. So this is something you can do in most apps. It's not necessarily very unique to us, but we do allow you to see all the different information, right? So title, journal, the citations and references. As you get more familiar with your field, you will just naturally start to understand who are the key authors, what are the best journals, and so on. And so all of this we can see in the app. And later, if you're a more advanced researcher, you can also even filter by these results. So by filtering by author, filtering by journal, and so on. To read papers from Litmaps, you can always click on the actual title. It will take you to the source page. But sometimes it can be even faster to click on the PDF button. So you see PDF above your title name, and that will take you directly to the PDF. Now there's two conditions. If it's an open access paper, right, that means anyone on the internet basically can read it. It's very easy to read. That means we can easily give you a PDF and you'll instantly see it. If the paper is not open access, you also might be able to see it, but this depends on your institution, on your university. And we have a kind of a special third-party integration where if you click PDF, you will see an opportunity to to log in through something called LibKey. And so you can just check this in the application, see if your university or your organization is handled. And if it is, then it becomes very seamless in Litmaps. Like you click on this PDF button and you can instantly go to the PDF through your institutional access. So just a side note here for anyone here who is with a university and you want to be able to easily read papers as you discover them in Litmaps. And now probably the second best part of using Litmaps in general, because we already saw the first part, right? Start taking some starting papers, exploring the literature, and having a simple way to do that without getting overwhelmed, like using visuals. The second coolest thing, in my opinion, is being able to do that and also continue that in an iterative fashion and grow your entire literature library. So, it's great to start out on a topic and learn it and find some papers, but it's even more useful if you can all in one centralized place, like start to actually curate your library and iteratively search on what you already know. And that's pretty unique, I think, to Litmaps as well. But in this example, I'm searching for literature. Say I have the starting articles we talked about. And as I find something relevant, hey, this paper on microalgae X-polymers looks really important for me. I maybe clicked on it and maybe even browsed its PDF. What I can do is click the More Like This button and add it to the map. So this automatically saves it. First of all, it's very easy to keep your articles saved and organized because they're automatically saved to your map. But even more importantly, if I click refresh, it will now rerun the search algorithm using all these input papers. And that's true for any amount of articles I put in. Now there are some like free pro limitations here. So I think at a certain number of articles, you will be asked, hey, do you want to upgrade? But I'm pretty sure don't quote me. The limit's somewhere around 20 or 100. So we have to double check. Apologies, I can't say it off the top of my head. Okay, someone put in the chat. Thank you. 20 free articles which means that you can put 20 articles as search inputs. The reason that this is a limit is because when we start searching on more and more articles, right, say 100 articles as a search input, 300 articles as a search input, these are really powerful searches, right? So that's saying you could take your whole 500 article literature review and search on more results. This is an intense computation, and that's why it's something that we consider to be, right, something on the premium tier, which we'll get into later. There's tons of affordable educational pricing and so on. But that's kind of the idea behind it. So just to give you an idea, growing the maps and iteratively searching is a really, really great use case. And it just using this more like this button, we're adding an article to the Litmap. Additionally, we have something called tagging. So as you're growing your Litmap, awesome, you can keep track, you can focus your search, but you might start to lose track of different topics. So tagging is just a way to keep track of subtopics by marking them in a certain color and name, with ultimately the result hopefully looking something like this. And the last thing I'll touch on, since I just have 2 minutes, I kind of knew I would probably not have too much time for your thoughtful questions, but we will have another session at the end of today where hopefully we'll have maybe 15, 20 minutes for lots of questions, and hopefully I can take any Litmaps questions at that time. But the next part is staying up to date, which is also incredibly easy and free to do with Litmaps. So I really always want to touch on it is once you've curated a map of articles or you've found these relevant articles on your topic, whatever number, it's very simple to just check or set up an automatic system to check if new articles come out that are connected to your work. So the way it works is right now, you have your input articles, you run them through Litmaps. Oh, here are the relevant connections. But how do you know if next week, when we update our database with, say, 300,000 new articles, if any of those are relevant to your research? You have to log in every time, rerun this. I mean, it's just not sustainable. So clicking monitor on a Litmap at the top of the Litmap screen, if anyone is on the app and you can see that, you just click enable monitor and that's it. You get automatic alerts only if a paper comes out that is highly connected to your own articles. Super easy, and yeah, it's just a low risk way to see what's coming out that's connected to your work. And finally, on a small note here, this is kind of getting into the final steps of the literature review process, which is, again, this part is similar to hopefully many apps you use. If the app doesn't let you cite or reference the work, this is probably going to not be so useful. So, of course, every article you find, you can easily cite it. So you can click the citation logo next to the PDF logo and citing in different styles. And you can also export articles in bulk, whether it's from your Litmap, whether it's from a tag, or so on. So this is how Litmaps covers the many steps, although not all, not writing, but many steps of the literature review process. Really, our goal is just to make it faster, more productive, and helping us all to get through the different challenges you all listed out earlier that many researchers have that are consistent, even though the landscape is changing and we have new tools. These are the kind of challenges we're trying to address. So you all have many thoughtful questions in here. I do have only 2 minutes until the next speaker, so I think I will, yes, I think I will have to hold off. Maybe I will post in the chat just a guide or two to answer some of these. But for now, I think I'd rather not compromise the time of our next speaker because they're going to really provide some great information, and I don't want to slow us down here. So yeah, we'll take a break from Litmaps and literature review, but as I said, in about 2 hours, after these 2 talks, I'll have a small brief conclusions and we can go over more questions. So, but for right now, for the next hour, we'll be with Nath from the PhD Place. And so just to give you an idea, if anyone has heard of the PhD Place, why don't you actually drop us a line in the chat, just saying, yeah, if you heard of the PhD Place. It's basically an incredible group. So if there's a Twitter account, there's a website, it's this centralized area with tons of resources and a way to connect PhD students. So I'm sure Nath will give you much more information about that and hopefully links and all that stuff. But he's the founder and he runs this website, runs this organization, and he'll be sharing with us a really great comprehensive overview of what he calls the PhD plan. So I'm also very excited to hear it. And yes, thank you for getting a few yes in the chat, people who know you, who know the PhD place. So yeah, we'll jump in so that way we have plenty of time. And at the end, again, please post your questions, and at the end we can ask Nath, yeah, any questions on this topic. Thanks so much for being here, Nath.
Thank you very much. Yes. Well, first, I want to say an enormous thank you to you, Marina and Litmaps, for inviting me to speak today and for organizing this wonderful and also very generous event for the academic community, which I hope will be the first of many. My talk today is targeted at PhD students, but really there are great tips relevant to people at all levels of the academic career. So we're just going to start with a little video. Awesome. So as you can see, doing a PhD requires passion, perseverance, and resilience. It also requires a lot of coffee, tolerance for rejection, and an ability to communicate your research in vastly different ways. And for this reason, I believe that a PhD is an incredibly powerful achievement. You dedicate 3 to 8 years of your life to a research project that you're passionate about. And it's potentially the most formative piece of your academic career because for most of us, this is the one time in our careers when we're able to prioritize research above all else. But you might be surprised to know that the reality of a PhD is far from idealistic. There's the publish or perish culture, the pressure to present your research, to gain teaching experience, to mark papers. It means that stress levels are high and there's a financial strain, which does have a real impact for many of us. Then there's also the peer review process, predatory journals, imposter syndrome, and procrastination. But on top of all that, there's constant rejection, there's rejected papers, there's ignored funding applications, getting sidelined at conferences, and your parents are very unlikely to know what your PhD is about. But everyone seems to want to know when you're going to submit it. So, because of the very nature of studying a niche research interest, PhDs are often completed in isolation. Loneliness, therefore, is a common experience, whether you're working from home, in an office, in a lab, or as a distance learner. We very rarely enter this journey with an academic network already behind us. And all of this is why I started the PhD Place in 2022. So it began as a Twitter account back when it was called Twitter, at a time when I was very isolated in my own PhD journey. And I started by sharing my experiences of doing a PhD. And this very quickly turned into a blog and a YouTube account for people to share their experiences too. So today we've shared stories from scholars at over 100 universities. I think it's more than that now, but it was 100 a couple of months ago, and have just under 150,000 followers across our networks. We've launched a series of free writing groups, we've held cash giveaways, and we've branched out into video walkthroughs of different research tools, contributing to this significant commentary on the rise of AI. So today's talk is going to be an opportunity to reflect and hopefully learn together. If you feel comfortable, I encourage you to embrace the idea that collaboration is so much more powerful than competition. So please share your stories and your advice with your new international community of researchers here in the comments of this conference. And if I've learned anything from my role in the PhD place, it's that yes, the PhD experience and the academic career can very often feel isolating, but we can learn from each other by being open with one another and benefiting from pooling our advice and our understanding like we are today. So today I'll be presenting the PhD plan, which pools the wisdom, the knowledge, and the advice that I've learned from the PhD community over the last few years. By following this plan and implementing small changes to your research journey, you can hopefully make meaningful progress towards your PhD whilst also looking after yourself in the process. So, prioritize is the first step in the PhD plan. To actually make the most of that time, you need a clear plan. Otherwise, you risk going in hundreds of different directions and making absolutely no progress. So the most important thing I want you to prioritize in your academic work is consistency. And actually, I want you to prioritize consistency over perfection, which is not an easy thing to do. Progress doesn't come from waiting for the perfect moment to write your thesis or read that paper. You don't need to wait for a Monday or the first day of the month or a sudden burst of inspiration or motivation. In fact, it is never too early in your PhD to develop an effective and regular writing habit. Progress comes from showing up again and again and again. And you don't need to have those perfect words in your mind in order to type them out on your computer or write them down. And of course, you already know this. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you just to be consistent because that would be absolutely useless. But what I am going to do is talk about why it's so hard to stay consistent and what small practical changes can actually help you build a habit of consistency in a way that's realistic and sustainable. So firstly, ask yourself, are your goals clear enough? One of the biggest obstacles to consistency, at least in my experience, is vagueness. So maybe you sit down at your desk each morning and you think, I need to write a thesis. Or maybe you've honed it in a little bit, I need to write my literature review. But both of these are just too broad, which means that you don't actually know where to start. One of the most demotivating things is getting to the end of the day and thinking, what did I actually accomplish? So instead, try being specific. That big picture, your thesis, your literature review is important. But to get there, you need to take small, actionable steps. So before you start, maybe even the night before, try defining what success looks like for each day. So instead of, I need to work on my thesis, you could say, I'm going to write 500 words today. I will finish editing this chapter by Friday, or maybe you'll use Litmaps, create a literature map from 10 a.m. to midday. And the clearer those goals are, the more likely you are to actually achieve them and achieve them without feeling completely overwhelmed. Next, you have to ask yourself, are your goals realistic? Academics juggle a ridiculous number of responsibilities. We've got planning experiments, recruiting participants, reviewing literature, teaching, marking, writing papers. That's before you even start to think about your thesis chapters, and it's a lot. When you've got that much to do, it can be so overwhelming that you actually end up doing nothing at all. And then, of course, that makes you feel even worse. So how can you make sure that you keep showing up? Firstly, by making that to-do list realistic. So I recently came across a really fantastic tip from Dr. Vicky Wright, who is the PhD life coach. If you haven't checked her out, go and do it. She's awesome. But she suggested that at the start of each week, cut your to-do list in half. And okay, that might sound a little bit drastic, but I love this tip because most of us actually overestimate what we can get done in a single week. And at the same time, underestimate what we can achieve over time if we just show up consistently. Next, I want to talk about building good habits and protecting your research time. So, are you actually protecting those goals? Prioritization isn't just about setting goals, it's about protecting them and ensuring that they get completed. So maybe your biggest challenge isn't actually time management. Maybe your biggest challenge is just sitting down and actually getting started, which I can absolutely relate to. If that is the case, then I would recommend habit stacking, which is basically a fancy way of saying you can attach your PhD work to something that you already do. So, for example, after I finish the dishes, I will write for 30 minutes. Or after I have coffee, I will read one journal article. So, by pairing your PhD work with something that's already a habit, consistency becomes something that's far more natural. Now, I want to talk about not just starting to work, but actually starting a project and getting over the challenge of a blank page. So, there's two approaches that I have used in the past. Firstly, which is a really great mindset shift, is free writing. Free writing is a practice where you maybe choose to set a timer. So, you might say half an hour, 15 minutes, whatever it is. But importantly, you forget about academic writing conventions, about grammar, about spelling, and you just simply write and get everything there, everything down on the paper. And it doesn't matter if you don't make, if it doesn't make sense and actually, I would encourage you not to read it until you've written, until you've got everything, every single possible idea that you have in your brain down on the paper. And then later you can revisit it, reformulate your thoughts, and edit what you've written. If you prefer a more visual approach, you can also try doing a similar practice, but by drawing your research. So I once attended a workshop at the University of Warwick where a researcher encouraged us to take a piece of paper and some colored pens and to draw our research very literally, and it was actually very useful because it forced us to think about our research topics in new ways and made that process feel much less rigid. And I absolutely cannot draw. So just know that that does not matter in the slightest. Okay, next, I would like to welcome Jamie. I will hand you over to my colleague for today and guest speaker, who is also deeply committed to supporting PhD students. So, Dr. Jamie Pay will guide us through a reflection of our practices by posing really important questions about our research and connecting them to our research goals. So, I'll hand you over to Jamie now.
Hello, 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 everyone. So good to be here today, and an honor to be co-presenting with Nathan today. So just a quick intro to who I am. I'm Jamie Pay. I myself did my PhD in qualitative social science at the University of York in the UK and completed my PhD in 2021 and have been conducting trainings, workshops, and coaching for PhD folk since around that time. I was already doing training while I was still doing my PhD. I now also work with self-employed people, solo business owners. I also run a coaching business. I call myself a work play coach, and this will become evident in what I'm about to share with you. I'm very passionate about helping people to find truly genuine harmony and integration between their work and their life. I don't like to use the term work-life balance. I think it's more than balance. I think it's about integration and harmony. Um, and this is an approach that I bring into my PhD coaching and training work as well. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, how I got into training and coaching was that I very much loved my own PhD experience. I found it one of the most rewarding, joyful, pleasurable, enriching experiences of my life. And I recognize now, thinking back, that one of the key factors in that was because I was very, very deliberate and intentional about not letting the PhD take over and consume my life. I was very, very clear about the fact that I wanted my PhD to live alongside and be a truly integrated part of my whole life, not to take over everything. Okay. And we see this happening quite a lot in academia, right? Like the research and the PhD becomes all consuming. So this is what I'm going to be talking about with you as we're going through Nate's great plan and thinking about how you design your PhD experience. This section is going to be about how to design your best life, both within the PhD and beyond it. How you can really design your days and get very, very clear about shaping and curating your PhD experience so that it becomes really lovingly integrated into a part of your life. So what my section here aims to do is to help you to really get clarity around your goals, both professionally, academically, and personally. It's going to help you tap into and reconnect with your innermost motivations and core values, and to rekindle what is important to you, what you're passionate about, what you stand for, both in your research life and in your work, as well as in the rest of your life. And then we're going to look at how we can use all of these elements. I'll show you a little dynamic map that we can use to then help you to make better aligned decisions for both your research and your life. So we're going to look at what is joyful and important for you in 3 key areas. In the research itself, that's the first one. In the wider PhD experience. And finally, in your life as a whole. Okay, and then we're going to bring all of those elements together into a dynamic map, which will serve as a kind of a tool and a guide for you to plan your next steps, whether that's making decisions for within your PhD and your research, or for future career planning, or even broaden that for your future life planning. Okay, so we're going to start with just 1 or 2 minutes of reflection. I can't see you, obviously, with how this is set up at the moment. So I am going to run through some prompts and some questions. Feel free to take a screenshot of the slides. I do encourage you to take these away and spend some quiet time, fix yourself a nice drink and a snack, sit down somewhere comfy and work through these prompts in more detail on your own. There's only so much that we're going to be able to do in this short section, but just take a note of these prompts and go away and spend some time really reflecting, really get in touch with like that core part of you that sets you alight, that feels sparky and aligned and juicy for you, right? And journal and reflect and make a note of these. So let's go right back. We're going to start by looking at the research itself. We're going to go right back to the very, very early basics of the research that you're doing and reconnecting and remembering what has felt joyful about it so far. If you're at the beginning of your PhD, that's still fine. There is something along the journey that has brought you to this point to start a PhD. So what is it? What is that? What was that first fire that inspired you to pursue a PhD or to do further research in this particular area? Now, just a moment to acknowledge here that, it's very easy to get very cynical, to start feeling overwhelmed about everything that you have to do, and to also kind of feel like, oh, well, this is work, what is there to be joyful about in this? So this is about really countering that, okay? It's getting back to the beginning, that's first spark that inspired you to pursue this research, to think about what brought you to the subject in the first place. Why was it so important for you to have made that decision to commit this number of years to doing this deep work? So here are the first set of questions for you to reflect and journal around. What do you love and enjoy about your research? Why is this research important to you? What brought you to this subject or to this field in the first place? Why does it interest you? Maybe it's nothing deep. Maybe you just really love Victorian trains, or you just really love studying the twisted politics of 18th century wherever, right? And finally, this is one of my favorite questions. How can your research change the world? And I know this sounds very dramatic, and that's deliberate. It's meant to be a big question because honestly, truly, whatever your research is in, there is something in it that can change the world. And that change might only be a small change. It might only be for a small part of the world, but it is still change. So I'm just going to keep quiet now for about a minute for you to think these through, maybe start jotting down a few notes for yourself around these questions.
Dr. Pei, could I just ask you, someone is asking in the chat if we can repeat the questions because they don't, we have, or maybe is there one question on the slide here that they can think about for this time just because they can't remember all these really good questions you're bringing up?
Oh, sure. Okay. Yes, let's answer that big question. How can your research change the world?
Cool.
And can I just check, can you see the slides? Because the questions are on the slides at the moment.
Yeah, one, two, three, four. These five questions, right? These are the ones we
Yeah.
focused on. Yes. Okay, great. Then yes, then the audience, yeah. I mean, I can see those. Yeah, everyone can see them. That's great. So these
Yeah.
are the
So
ones we're
feel free
focusing
to
on.
screen grab take a screenshot and you can go back to visit all the other questions later. But for now, I'd start by answering, how can your research change the world? I'm just going to give you another like 15 seconds, just in the interest of time. And you don't have to have a perfect answer. This is definitely something that you can come back to. And in fact, I do encourage you to regularly check back in with these questions across the life of your PhD to really reconnect with those initial motivations. Okay, Nath, can you please move to the next slide? All right, so next, we're going to widen our scope a little bit to look a little more broadly at the larger, wider PhD experience and the PhD journey. So this is less about the actual research itself or the subject or discipline that you're in, and it's more about your experience as a whole. So not just the research, but all the other supporting activities, your interactions, the events that go alongside the research of the main, thesis. And also the skills and the talents and the capabilities that you are discovering in the process of participating in and enjoying these other experiences and activities. So it's very, very common for us to just sit around and moan and have a little rant with each other. I'm absolutely guilty of doing this myself. We just sit around and talk about everything that's going wrong in our research, and we hate the system. We're mad at our supervisors. We don't like this one person in our department who's giving us a lot of bother. So this exercise is to flip the script a little bit and to refocus our attention on what is going well. What are you doing well? What are you enjoying about the PhD journey? So here are some more questions for you to reflect on. What activity outside of research have you participated in that you've enjoyed? So things like conferences, maybe, event organization, networking, teaching, publishing. What parts of the PhD journey are you enjoying so far and why? And what skills have you discovered or developed so far during your PhD? So again, I'm just going to give you a real quick minute to think about these questions. All right. Can we move to the next section, please? Next slide. Okay, so now we're zooming out even further to look at your core life values. So this is about what's important to you in your life as a whole, and what are the values that you want to shape everything that you do in your life, not just within the PhD, but across the spectrum of your life. So, we get very bogged down. It's very easy to speed along trying to finish all your deadlines, get your tasks done, get your experiments done, collect data. And you get caught up in all of that sometimes you can lose that inner compass of like, where are you actually going? What do you actually want for your life? So thinking about your core values, this is going to shape how you experience your PhD journey, and it's also going to shape how you think about and approach both life and careers beyond the PhD. All right. So this is going to sound a little bit corny, maybe even a little bit cliched, but really these are your North Stars, right? This is your North Star, your core values. This is what is going to anchor you back to help you make the decisions that you need to make. So can we go to the next slide, please? I'm very conscious of time. The next one with the core values. Yes, there we go. All right. Please take a screen grab of this. These are just some of the values that you may want in your life and that are important to you and to your day-to-day, like moment-to-moment happiness. So I would like, again, to encourage you, make yourself a nice drink, sit somewhere quiet, and think about which 3 values out of this list would be your top 3. And this may take a little time to figure out, but once you figure out those top 3 values, those values are going to be your North Star. They're going to be the anchor and the foundation that you always return to inform the decisions that you're trying to make, to inform your next steps, to consider how you want to proceed. When you're at a fork in the road, that's really what's going to help you to decide which direction to go. All right, can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah. Okay, so finally, we're going to put it all together, all right? Use this Venn diagram to look at all your reflections in terms of what's joyful and important to you in your research, what's joyful and important to you in your overall PhD experience, and what is important for you in your life as a whole. And then start noticing where those overlaps in those values might be, and use those values as a guide for making onward decisions. So just a very, very quick example before I wrap this up. You may want to look at if you're trying to decide on kind of what activity to participate in. Okay, so that's really about your research and your research journey. So you might want to ask yourself, if you're deciding whether or not to take on an activity, you might ask yourself, okay, well, does this activity align with what is joyful and important for me, both in the research and in the research journey? Okay. As you're planning your future career, as you're thinking about what you want to do after the PhD, you might then look at the overlap between the 2 circles between the PhD experience and the joyful life. To think about, okay, what kind of skills and activities have I participated in that would also align with the kind of life and things that I would want to do beyond the PhD. So ultimately, you want to get to the sweet spot in between all 3 of the circles where your values are aligned across all 3 of your spheres. What's joyful in your research lines up with what's joyful in your research life, and that lines up with what's joyful and important to you across your wider life and values. All right, I am over time, and I can't dive into this more deeply, but if you want to come and speak to me and Nath, we're happy to dive into this with you a little bit deeper at another time. But hopefully that's going to be a nice start for you to start thinking about what is really, truly important for you and what you would like to direct both your PhD experience and the experience beyond that. All right, I'm handing back to Nathan now. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you very much to you, Jamie, for that reflection and reminder of what truly matters during your research journey. I struggled with that list of words. I think I will have to go back and look through those. I remember when I was about halfway through my master's, I started looking through the internet for PhD opportunities. I remember finding my potential supervisors and reading the titles of their research papers in just absolute amazement. To me, they were the most fantastic, interesting people. Their research was fascinating, it was relevant to my interests, but they'd also already found out so much about my research topic that I was so passionate about. Um, okay, the application was hard work, but I really remember that feeling of excitement. There was a lot of waiting involved, but that anticipation, the recognition of the opportunity, and the chance that I was being given to do a PhD, and the joy of being accepted onto the program, that's one of the things that definitely continues to fuel me and fuel my passion for academia. But this leads perfectly onto what I want to talk about next, which is the L in the PhD plan framework, and that is leveraging your network and community. So I first met Jamie a couple of years ago after she ran a workshop called Perfectly Imperfect Writing Practices for Your Thesis. Hopefully that is right. I think that is right. What stuck with me on that day, besides the fact that she's obviously a very brilliant speaker, was that it taught me something I really needed to hear early on in my PhD, and that is that it's okay for things to be quite messy. And instead of trying to chase perfection, we should all try and be just that little bit kinder to ourselves, pay attention to what our brains and our bodies need, and accept things aren't always going to go to plan. And I still remember that when I feel stuck, just to take a step back, go for a walk, try and find a way to get myself back on track. So, this part of this part of the talk stems from an unfortunate but very real truth about academia that more often than not, it's not about what you know, but who you know. And does that mean that your research and your knowledge, it doesn't matter? Of course not, but it does highlight the importance of building those professional net relationships, those networks at your university, at other institutions too, and also intersectionally. There are, of course, plenty of very classic ways to build your network. So that often starts with the immediate academic circles, so the people around you at your university. Um, this includes managing your expectations of your supervisor and also their expectations of you. Networking with colleagues in your department and adjacent fields, fellow PhD researchers, and postdocs. And of course, these spaces are typical networking grounds, but they can also present challenges. So, for instance, in a social sciences department, it's quite likely that most of your colleagues won't have the same research interests as you do, but honestly, I don't think it matters too much from a networking perspective. I'd actually encourage you to engage with talks and conferences that are not directly related to your research. If you think about conference themes are always quite broad, but they can still be very valuable because stepping outside of your niche gives you the chance to learn about different subjects, different methods, and different perspectives. But it also helps you to build friendships and a sense of academic community. At, at the end of the day, we're all in that same boat, doing a PhD or navigating academia, regardless of our specific research topics. Also, let's be honest, showing up for others matters. So if you attend your colleagues' research talks, chances are they're going to be in the audience when it's your turn to present. That's just how collegiality works. If you support others, then hopefully that support will come back to you when you need it. So I just want to expand slightly on conferences. Presenting your own research is a really fantastic way to develop your network, but I want you to think that the benefits of that might not even be in the room. So if I give you an example, recently I had the amazing opportunity, once in a lifetime opportunity, to present my research findings at Stanford's Department of Religious Studies. And after the talk, a scholar came up to me and they said, "Hey, I really enjoyed your presentation. This is not my field, but do you know Professor X at University Y?" Wasn't Charles Xavier, though that would have been pretty cool. But they said, if you want to give me your email, then I can make the connection for you. And really, that is the power of networking. You don't know who will pass your name along to the right person. And even if your research doesn't directly connect with someone in that room, that person might know exactly who you should be speaking to. But of course, these networks, they can often feel quite transactional, and that's where the distinction between a network and a community is really important. One of the ideas that stuck with me throughout my PhD journey came from a professor who made this distinction between developing a network versus finding your community. And this was a tenured professor emphasizing the isolation that people can feel even further down the line. Yes, it is very, very, very important to get your name out there, to promote yourself in academic circles, and to be known for your work, to make connections at conferences, to share your research on social media. But it's just as important, if not more important, to find those people that will genuinely support you, to just find your team. And that shift in mindset completely changed how I personally approach networking. It meant that the connections I was building weren't just professional, they were also meaningful and sustainable too. And most importantly, it made me feel less alone when, what can be a very tricky and unpredictable journey. If you can, try to engage not just with the conference itself, but with everything that happens around it. So, for instance, here today, engage with the chat if you can. Some of the most valuable conversations that I've ever had didn't happen during the conference session. They actually happened during the coffee breaks or in the bar afterwards. Um, yeah, so just take advantage of those extra spaces. Now, I get it. It's not always possible to speak to someone at an event. Hopefully, your supervisor will be there with you to introduce you to their network, but not everybody does have that luxury. And it can also be quite intimidating to just walk up to someone and introduce yourself, especially if they're like a keynote speaker or someone really important, maybe a celebrity professor. Sometimes you have to be more strategic, and that is completely fine. You can follow up after the event, you can send cold emails, be persistent, but in like an enthusiastic way, not an unsettling way. And if you meet someone at a conference or connect with them online, then send them a quick message or just to keep that conversation going. I've connected with so many scholars just by reaching out after reading their paper and trying to find out more. And for me, taking those few minutes to send an email has opened doors to institutional visits overseas. I spent 6 months of my PhD in the Netherlands working as a research assistant. That all started with an email. It's led to co-authoring papers with leading scholars in my field, online meetings with scholars in other countries who are doing very similar studies to mine, which is really interesting. And also people just sending me their papers, which is always a good thing. And of course, don't be afraid to really get creative with how you build your network. So take it from a student who is currently very privileged to be giving a 1 hour talk with Litmaps. Sometimes the best opportunities are the ones that you create yourself. But it's really important to surround yourself with good people, people who lift you up, because you shouldn't have to do your PhD alone. This brings me to the third part of the PhD plan, which is about the importance of being adaptable, being able to adapt. Now, the best piece of advice I ever received from my PhD supervisor was to be teachable. At that time, ironically, I was like, yeah, obviously that makes sense. But over time, I really came to understand and appreciate what that meant to be teachable, to learn from others, and to adapt your approach to your research. And that advice was for my end of year meeting with my supervisors. And let's be honest, your PhD research very rarely goes exactly as planned. It could be something like an experiment that failed, a participant that cancelled an interview, data that didn't support your argument, or maybe finding a thesis with the exact research question as yours from 1982. It has happened, I've seen it. Um, or maybe just a rejection email that makes you question your entire academic career. All of that is perfectly valid to feel. And in fact, it's completely normal. It happens to all of us. But your research is supposed to evolve, especially from that first day. But the most important part of your PhD is not your PhD, it's you, and you are supposed to evolve, to learn, and to adapt as well as you go along. But adaptability is just not something that I can share with you. It's something that you develop by being open to outside influences. What I can do is share the advice and strategies that have helped me during my PhD journey in the hope that some of them might be useful to you. But the reality is that we all have different PhDs and we all navigate those research challenges slightly differently. So this is an excellent opportunity for us to pool our resources here and embody that ethos of collaboration. So whether it's a specific strategy, a piece of advice, or even just a small habit that has changed the way you approach your research, I want you to think about and share one thing that has helped you during your PhD in the comments below this talk. Hopefully, we can flood the comments with new ways to embrace the unpredictable nature of research and learn from each other's tips. And hopefully, Marina can share some of the best ones with us at the end of this talk too. These are some of the best pieces of advice I have received that have ultimately transformed my approach to my work. But what's striking about them is that they're not particularly enormous. They are generally quite small. So if I go through them and you can choose to take them on board, or perhaps it will inspire you to share something that you've been using. So number one is I always keep a progress book at the end of each work session, at the end of each day. I write one sentence summary of what I've accomplished and what needs to happen tomorrow. And it's particularly the part that needs to happen tomorrow that helps me maintain continuity and reduces the stress of figuring out where to start the next day. On that note, if I walk away from my computer, I use a placeholder word while writing. So when switching between sections in a document, I always use a random word in my case, I like to use fruit like apple or banana. So it's a word that you can easily search for in the document and pick up where you left off. So just use Control F, apple, and then you'll find where you were as you're switching between different parts of your work. If your PhD happens to be on fruit, then maybe use something else, maybe use sports. But yeah, that's a tip that has helped me. Tip number 3 is to walk away from your work that is finished, the first draft, that needs editing. After you've finished a draft, defamiliarize yourself from your work before you start editing it. Otherwise, you're not going to spot your mistakes. There's a couple of excellent strategies to do this, the best being time. If you can leave your work for maybe a week or two and then return to it, you'll be coming back to it with fresh eyes. That's really important. But I completely appreciate that we don't all have the luxury of time. So some other things that you could do, you could change the font. You could change the size or which font you're using. And you could also try reading your work out loud in order to engage with it in a different way. Tip number 4 is for people who work from home. And if you do quite often work from home, as many of us do, try to create some sort of separation between home and work. One way that you could do this is by taking a short walk before you start working, as if you were commuting to an office, to your PhD office. And when you come back, that's not your home anymore. Now it is your office, and you've made that journey. The last one is probably the most important for me personally because of how I navigated my PhD in the early days. Instead of checking emails throughout the day, I limit myself to 2 focused email sessions, but whatever works for you. So for example, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon, so that you can protect your deep work time. What you're really doing here is saying no and prioritizing your time, which is definitely a skill that is needed as an academic. Some of these might sound like really small changes, but the truth is you don't need an enormous shift to make a meaningful difference to your productivity. And also, just remember that doing a PhD doesn't mean getting things right the first time. And honestly, it's very unlikely that it's going to go right the first time. As I learned from Jamie, research is messy. Try to adapt as you go. Consider trying out different tips and tricks that people have shared with us in the comments, hopefully below this talk as well. Okay, now I'd like to talk about protecting your well-being. The final part of the PhD plan is arguably the most important. You can prioritize your research by setting clear goals, leverage your networks to find communities and build opportunities and find networks. And you can also adapt to the many twists and turns of PhD life, but really none of that matters if you don't take care of yourself. Your research, your network, your ability to adapt all depend on one thing, and that is you. As I said right at the beginning of this talk, doing a PhD is challenging for each of us in lots of different ways. So, in fact, a study at the University of Westminster recently outlined that nearly half of PhD students feel that developing a mental health problem is just a normal part of the PhD journey. And okay, you are not a failure if you resonate with that statistic, but it should horrify us. It horrifies me. It's a sign that our approach, our collective approach, is actually deeply flawed, and that academia is demanding way too much of PhD students, offering way too little support, and that we need to prioritize ourselves in that process. Some days it really doesn't matter how many hours you put in. There's always that little voice in your head saying, didn't finish what I was supposed to finish today. Or maybe I should just keep working and get more words down on the page. But one of the most powerful ways to protect your well-being is to build accountability into your research. So if you had a target for that day, or you've worked a certain number of hours, stop. You need to find and nurture those sustainable habits that work best for you and your PhD. So whether it's setting realistic goals at the beginning of the day, using a logbook to track your progress, pick up where you left off, changing your workspace, moving to a new environment to reset your focus, setting boundaries with emails, or just saying no to things that simply aren't going to benefit you, logging off at 5 p.m. at the end of the day, even if you haven't completed all your tasks, there are lots of things that you can do to reset. And this final point here is really, really important. Overwork gets you absolutely nowhere but burnout. So try to build rest into your routine before rest becomes an absolute necessity. Okay. In a recent blog post on the PhD Place, Professor Inga Mewburn, who is better known as the Thesis Whisperer, highlighted something really important, and that is the power of creating spaces where PhD students and academics feel less alone. So she writes about how academia can be incredibly isolating and how platforms like her blog provide not only practical advice, but emotional validation and a sense of well-being. And this really resonates with me because PhD success is not just about intelligence or hard work, it's about sustainable practices, and more importantly, having a strong community and a network. And if you want to improve the PhD experience and the academic experience together, then we need to create more spaces for connection. So if I was to give you an example that's very close to my heart, I run the PhD Place online writing group. Even just writing with people at the same time as you can make an enormous difference to your accountability. We hold structured writing sessions that you're very welcome to join us. They're launching again soon. The link will be up after this talk. And the link will be on our website, that's thePhDplace.com. And we're also on most social networks at the PhD Place too. But this is just one example of a space that you might use. So if the time and date for our writing sessions don't work for you, then there are other writing groups online, and there are other free writing groups online as well that I would encourage you to use. But I want you to take away from this that there are communities of researchers out there who are here to continue the conversation with you beyond these types of talks, who are actually getting it and who are here for you. And to end, I just want to remind you that it doesn't matter what stage you are in your academic career, it doesn't matter if you're doing a master's, if you're in a first year, or you're a tenured professor, you have already achieved so much by getting to this point, and that is already worth celebrating. So please remember, if you are doing a PhD as well, your PhD doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be finished. And as always, to everyone who's joined us today, good luck on your academic journey, and thank you for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate. That was just fantastic. And of course, a big thank you as well to your colleague Jamie. What a wonderful and comprehensive deep dive into the entire PhD process, but zooming out to like the life-sized version. Thanks so much for this. And I welcome everyone to please, we have at least 5 minutes for any questions. If you have any questions for Nath or Jamie about the PhD plan or the PhD place, or I guess just PhD full stop, then please drop them in the chat, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer them. Getting some nice hearts, I think, as a thank you for your presentation.
That's excellent. Yeah, no, I can see lots of
Mhm.
nice comments. Thank you very much. And
Yeah.
yeah, thank you to Jamie as well for joining me today.
Mm. Mm. Great. Many thank yous coming in about the PhD place. So I think some people here today already know about the group and probably the blog and social media, but hopefully some more of you today, if you enjoyed this, definitely check them out. Maybe we'll drop the links at least in the chat here, so you guys can just land right on page. We'll leave a link to the PhD place, and of course, if you're big on Twitter, you could give them a follow there as well.
And now TikTok too.
Oh, on TikTok, yes, there you guys are everywhere. So you're
Yeah,
you're
our
easy
post about this event did really well.
to find.
Yeah.
Hmm. Wonderful. Well, if there's no questions at this time, then we can, I think, give a warm, warm thank you so much to you, Nate, for walking us through such a nice, comprehensive plan and strategy. And yeah, you guys are really taking this from the holistic perspective, which I think, maybe that's something you yourself or many students would have appreciated earlier in their process. So it's great to have that brought to the forefront at whatever stage everyone is at.
Great. Thank you very much, Marina.
Yes, thank you. Have a wonderful day and hopefully, yeah, we see you around. We still have one more talk and then a brief wrap up.
Awesome. And hopefully see you at the next conference as well.
Yes, hopefully. And thank you, Jamie. Have a wonderful day as well. And thank you for joining us. Great. And so we have just a few minutes until our next presentation. And so I'll just go ahead and introduce the final presenter that we have here today. Now, for the rest of today, it's quite flexible. So we have the next hour for this talk, and then I have a 30-minute wrap-up session. And this next speaker will be around in the final session. So in the final session, if you are still around, you can ask questions about anything in the conference, but we will have Litmaps present and Ilya here. So especially questions about Litmaps, note-taking, and so on will definitely get answered. But even if your questions about the PhD place or anything else that was covered today or yesterday, we can also do our best to answer it. So for the next talk, we have Ilya Shabanov, and he is the creator of what's called the Effortless Academic. This is a website, and it has also social media components, like similar like the PhD place. And he also does courses. And so his expertise is really about, maybe this phrase that today you've heard quite a lot, but working right smart, not hard. Although, of course, we all are working hard no matter what, but working smart, especially when it comes to using notes and effective note-taking strategies. So everyone here, all researchers, right? Wherever you are on that path, you're reading papers, you're taking notes, you're writing up your research, but that process, not only can it be optimized, but it can be transformed to really serve your research. And that's a really unique perspective. And Ilya is going to get more into how we can really transform that workflow. How can we use an academic knowledge management system? How can we link our notes? How can we remember the papers we read? That was a question from earlier. So without waiting any further, we'll go ahead and introduce Ilya because he's here and dive into his presentation. Thanks so much for joining.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, yeah, you're all good.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Marina, for this beautiful introduction. And I'm very, very glad to be here. And yes, I can't emphasize it enough how interesting and important actually note-taking is. And we're gonna go into a little bit of a history lesson. We're gonna go a little bit into my own personal story, how that all happened, and then we're gonna get something practical out of it so you can actually start using these notes and these note-taking systems and see what you can benefit from it, and especially how AI plays into all of that. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm a bit of a barbarian, so I always share the entire screen because I'm going to switch between different apps. And we're going to start at the knowledge management and AI. And the big question that I'm asking today is, why do we take notes and still forget ideas? But before we start, I will refer to sometimes to links, sometimes to other things. So I created a little website, which is the effortlessacademic.com/litmaps. And on that website, you will find all kinds of information. For example, the blog post that I'm also mentioning, you can copy and paste some prompts that I will be using, and just you can find all the information on this website. So just go to effortlessacademic.com/litmaps, and you're going to find all that stuff. I think at the beginning of this conference yesterday, Marina asked in the Litmaps survey whether or not in 10 years most people or most papers will be written by AI. And that was actually true for most of you. You believe that that's going to happen. But the question is more interestingly whether or not they will be also conceived by AI, whether the ideas that come into the papers are also conceived by AI. And I think that's a little bit more of a tricky question because this general intelligence, AGI as it's called, is something that's still a little bit far away. And most importantly, people like are split into two. So some say AI is just a really good student, so it can help you to do things better, but it cannot really do innovative new research. And from my personal experience, that is absolutely true. So I can't really generate new ideas with AI so much, but I sometimes can help bring some connections together and then use my own mind to do that. And for that, I need notes because the notes are basically taking all my information and storing it and making it available to me. And you'll see in an instant what I mean by this. So I hope that this actually makes it easier to embrace AI when we can combine it with our own thoughts and our own ideas and not just, pawn off all the thinking to AI. And like all the second LinkedIn comment that I get is like, oh, but you should be able to do your literature review yourself. Like, yes, that's why I'm combining it and I'm doing it 10 times the speed. So why do we actually need this? And that comes from, I think, a fact that most of you know is that publication volume doubles every 9 years. So here at the bottom, the x-axis goes from the 17th century all the way. And even when my supervisor was doing her PhD, she was saying, she would read a couple papers and be on top of the field. A couple papers won't even get you past half a journal these days, right? And that has been just, a couple decades ago. So it gets more and more difficult. And the problem is less, the amount of available information. It's more that the consumption process of this information gets so difficult. And I see it this way. So we have basically a lot of information. There's a big, big, big part that we might consume and a much bigger part that is available. But only very little from that you actually manage to capture. Yeah. So some stuff you're like reading an interesting headline, you forget about it, and then maybe you bump into the same headline weeks later, and you're like, oh wow, that was interesting. Why didn't I read this? Well, because you don't have the time really to capture everything and to read everything. And then from there, you might, in an academic sense, take a few notes on this paper, take a few highlights, read the PDF. But from these notes, you have hundreds of them maybe. Only a small part goes into your working memory. So the working memory is that part of the brain that does the synthesis, so to speak, that takes ideas, rearranges them, and has this kind of network understanding. Yeah, and so that is what I mean by this little recycling symbol here. And from there, you get novel research ideas. So it's a process where you mine information from a really big mountain of available stuff, and you try to get it into this diamond state that you can publish. And along the way, you have all these losses. And so what AI brings to us is that this mountain gets bigger, but it also brings to us the ability that this process gets more efficient all the way up to here. This is up to our minds. This is something we can't really improve that much, but all of that here in between, we can actually improve really well with AI. And today I'm going to talk more about these last two parts. So when we take notes, yeah, so I will not talk about how to capture information because there are different Chrome plugins that you can use to quickly capture information. You can use reading lists, you can use different other tools and just kind of organize the information that you may be capturing. You can even use AI to kind of capture it for you. But that's a secondary challenge because in academia we mostly know what we should be reading, but we read it and we forget it. That's a much bigger problem. And so when we think about taking notes to remember stuff, we might end up with something like this. So these are my actual notebooks from a while ago where I was learning things, and I have many, many of these notebooks. I really like pen and paper. But the problem is you can never find anything. The only thing that it helps you to do is you write it down and it helps you remember things. And when you actually want to look up something and try to synthesize a big body of information, then you must remember that you had a note on a topic X. Yeah, how do I know, for example, that this notebook contains a note on some statistical test? Well, I have first of all I have to remember, okay, there was a note on the statistical test. Then I have to remember where it was and I have to find it. And so the traditional notes will always be limited by the capacity of our brain. We don't have to remember the subject matter, but we have to remember the subjects themselves. right? And so over time, you get so many subjects that even that explodes the capacity of your brain, or expands, surpasses the capacity of your brain. And that is where digital notes basically come in, because they allow us to scale that, to search our notes, and do all kinds of other little tricks. But first, let's look at the other problem that we have, and that is the problem of synthesis. So even if we switch to digital notes and we make references, right? So here in this diagram, I want to show you, I have three notes: global warming, an ice age, on the rising sea levels. They're all somehow related to climate change, and I'm trying to write a literature review on climate change. And maybe I was smart enough to put a little note down that this paper A somehow contradicts this paper B. Yeah, why is it global warming, but there is also an ice age? So that doesn't go well together. Yeah, can be a bit controversial here. But that only is available to you because you wrote this paper A and the note A and read the paper A after the ice age. Yeah, so you studied the ice age before. That's why you could write this. But if you were to only find your note on the ice age, there would be no reference to global warming. And if you find the note on the rising sea levels, there's no reference to anything whatsoever. So the problem is less the lack of knowledge, it's the lack of connection between this knowledge. Yeah, and that is absolutely essential. The knowledge really rests in the connection between notes and between ideas, right? Because very often new things are really just recombining old things, but making a new conclusion out of it, finding something that somebody hasn't seen. And that's quite often just a matter of connecting two things. So the modern way of solving this problem, and that's possible, it is through digital tools, because digital tools can solve the problem that when I read this note B, it can tell me, hey, there's actually a link that points towards B. So it's a backlink that we get from B to A. That's very easy to find. And what AI allows us to do is to take completely unrelated, unlinked notes, but link them semantically, because they talk about something that is semantically similar according to the AI. So in the makes sense. They talk about the same ideas. So AI can help us link those two together. So it gets a little bit easier, this problem of connectivity. But even if you have all of that, it will fail once you have to get to 1,000 notes. And like I can tell you from my personal experience, because I have, I think, a couple thousand in notes, and it's 500,000 words. It's a mess. Yes, and this mess, to organize that mess, is as much of an art as it is also a chore, but is something that, as we'll see, is incredibly beneficial to your PhD, your academic career, and also like in your private life if you want to organize knowledge. So if you ever asked yourself, like, how do I organize my notes? Because maybe you're starting doing notes and digging into this, as a lot of actually people have that work with information, and you need to organize it. You probably ran into a person called Niklas Luhmann. And Niklas Luhmann lived in the 1950s, or I think he was born in the 30s or 40s. And I was completely obsessed with him. And I'll tell you why. Because he found a solution for that problem, what we're having: links, connectivity, notes that are somehow easy to find, and he solved all of that. And as a result, he published 70 books in his lifetime, 400 papers, so he's been dead now for quite a while. And he has, to this day, over 300,000 citations, I think now, because that's already a couple of years old, only using a pen and paper. But he had a system how to organize his notes. And famously, he said that he is not thinking by himself. This predominantly happens in his slip box. So I'll show you a picture of that slip box. So it's a box with lots of index cards, basically. And that takes him up more time than to actually write the stuff. So that means that if you manage to do your note taking correctly, you already have half the work that you're usually putting into things like writing up your manuscript, ideas, communication with supervisors and colleagues, and so on. So note taking already takes all that and makes it really easy for you. And here's how Niklas Luhmann did it. So here on the top right, you see him working, and these are the different slips in his slip box. And I think in total he had 100,000 of them, so like completely absurd how many of them he had. And each of them had basically an index here at the top left. So the index could be something fairly complicated. He had his own system how he would develop the index. And he could also make links. Finally, the links are also underlined, just like you would see it in a normal browser that links are underlined. So he used the same idea, but decades before the internet. So yeah, so this 21/3A1K3 means that the node is part of, I don't know, batch 21, and then branch 3A, and then sub branch 1K, and so on. So this allowed him also to find physically where the node is located, because that's as much as a random ID, but it's also a physical address for the node. So he could now easily find the nodes, and he could easily connect the nodes. And he realized that creativity is actually connection, right? So that's the thing. So there were simple, small, narrow ideas, and then suddenly he started making connections. And when he would write his books, he would basically collect all these slips, all these paper slips, have like 100 of them, or I don't know, 20, and start writing up, because all the information that he needed was already in front of him, including the links. So that is, of course, incredibly cool, but also incredibly difficult in today's world. So today's tools automate this. And when I found this, I was like, okay, well, how does that work? And that brings us to my personal story, because my personal story started at least in the academic world, started at 36. Yeah, I was quite a successful entrepreneur in the past, and I did a lot of freelancing, world traveling, and so on. Then I decided I want to do something. I want to be more settled. So at 36, I decided, okay, I want to do a PhD. And what's actually my leverage over all these young people? Yeah. So my dad always used to say, you can only invent like really important things up in your 20s. And all the important scientists always invented stuff in their 20s. I was 36 and I was kind of worried about that. I did a lot of exercising, took a lot of fish oil and like sauna and whatever people would recommend for that. But I found that the bottleneck is actually never kind of your brain. The bottleneck is the organization of information. And that's something that you can learn. And yeah, and when I started doing not my PhD, but my volunteership for the PhD, which was about molecular biology, now I'm ended up in ecology. I started creating this like elaborate maps. I started taking notes with Notion, and I got this really nice recommendation letter from my supervisor back then, which was surprising to me. Like, why is it really that I learned so fast? I don't think so, but I think I'm good at organizing this knowledge, because I had a company with 25 people or so. I used to organize a lot of things, and that's actually the same ideas. And now we have Nicholas Luhmann, who already did all of that work, but it's just a little bit kind of out of date. So let's bring it to the 21st century. And so I started reading. Yeah, and there's a few ideas out there. So how to take smart notes. These are all two books and kind of an online thing. So how to take smart notes really teaches you to use that Zettelkasten. So the Slipbox Luhmann's method is called Zettelkasten, or Zettelkasten, I think it's pronounced. And the idea here is very complex, and it's kind of tries to mimic what Luhmann was doing, which I think is completely anachronistic. It doesn't fit the time anymore. So there are different ways, better ways how to organize that without kind of losing this core idea of connectivity and findability. And building a second brain is also something that people are very that's very popular, that builds on a digital app called Evernote. Then there's the Linking Your Thinking toolkit by Nick Milo, which uses Obsidian. So I studied all of them, and I found kind of it doesn't work for academia so well. While Zettelkasten would work for academia, it's kind of too complex and requires so much maintenance. Like nobody's going to do that. The Linking Your Thinking kit is just made kind of, it doesn't track the sources so well. It doesn't have this academic rigor that I would say that we would need. Yeah, and the second brain has this emphasis on different projects, and it organizes. It doesn't really build this big network of knowledge, at least how I experienced it. And after reading all this, I said, well, okay, let me experiment with all these ideas and combine them and make something that's for academics. And so over the last 3 or 4 years, that's what I've been developing. A note-taking system where I can remember and access every paper I've ever read in literally seconds, and every idea that I've ever had in seconds, where I can synthesize ideas and generate new ideas through connections. And that's what Luhmann's kind of key thing was, is this idea of connectivity. And something that expands my knowledge horizon. So knowledge horizon is a metaphor that I like to use, because if you look out the window, you see a certain part of the world. Yeah, that's your horizon. So everything that's in this horizon is information that you have access to. You might not see every detail, but you can go there and you can look at the details. You know that it's there. But there's also a lot of world behind the horizon. So a lot of information that you forget that you ever knew. And so when you go there, you move, you start reading a different part of your field, you realize like, hey, that's really stuff that's really cool. But then you forget where you came from. You forgot the stuff that you read 6 months ago. So your knowledge horizons kind of moves with you as you move through this sea of papers and ideas in the world, right? And so a digital note-taking system should expand your knowledge horizon. It should make it easy for you to navigate from A to B. Right, and that is what I found so fascinating, that it actually starts happening, that you feel kind of like diving into your notes. I'm going to show you all of that. So now it's theoretical, but just buffer this knowledge a little bit, and I'll show you all of these things, and we'll get a lot of time for questions. And the last requirement that is now the last 2 years basically becoming more and more important is that we can use AI directly on our notes, and we don't have this blank page there, because we can basically take our notes, use AI, generate like a first draft, and so on. And that note-taking system, above all, should be simple. So now I have I don't know, I think about 180 papers. I have 500,000 words, thousands of notes, and the system still works. And that's surprising to me, that it kind of stood the test of time. And so a couple of years ago, that's how I started the Effortless Academic, by basically telling people, this is how I do things. You can follow it, try it for yourself, be a gardener of your notes, and do that. And so far, thousands have been through these webinars, so it seems to work also for other people. And that's why I'm so grateful to be here and to pitch you my most favorite thing in the whole academic world. And of course, I only have now maybe 15 minutes to walk you through the basics of this system. But if you go again to effortlessacademic.com/litmaps, you can sign up for a free 8-day course where I send you like a really long piece of text every day, and you can think about it. You will learn about the right tools. You learn about the mindset and like just the idea of that. So it's much more than I can do right now. So just head over to the effortlessacademic.com/litmaps and fill in your email, and you'll get started on this note-taking journey. And then the question becomes, what tool are we going to use? Because Niklas Luhmann, of course, had no access to anything but pen and paper, as it has been for 1,000 years before. But in the recent years, we have many, many different tools that we can use, and I've been personally trying a lot of them. So I started with Evernote, and then I moved to Notion because I realized that that's a little bit more flexible and powerful. I tried Roam because that's very popular among academics, but found it like rather constraining and weird. It lacked an app. And then I ended up with Obsidian. And Obsidian is really the perfect balance between being very, let's say, it's not very easy, but it is kind of understandable once you get the idea. It works with metaphors that are very like ingrained into our brains. So it works with text files rather than like Roam with notes that are connected. It's kind of more abstract. So Obsidian is fairly easy. Every note is a text file, just like you would do it in Microsoft Word. But you can add links. You have a global search. You have thousands of plugins allowing you to add AI, add anything you want into this. I think Nath was mentioning that he's keeping track of his progress every day. So yeah, Obsidian allows you to add a calendar to Obsidian, and then you can create notes for every day and just basically track your progress. And I do use that as well, yeah, for managing kind of research projects more than just everyday life. And I can highly recommend to just start experimenting with Obsidian, because it's really a no-brainer. Yeah, it's like I call it the Google for your brain, because everything I know is stored in Obsidian, and I can search through it, navigate through it, organize it, and so on. So it's like literally like a second brain. And the key why it all works is that we create this network of knowledge. So think of it as a personal Wikipedia, maybe for your brain. So you have, let's say here, a paper on something pattern-oriented modeling of agent-based complex systems, blah, blah, blah. And then it relates to something, yeah, POM. So POM is pattern-oriented modeling, and then there's a little blurb of text about what that is, and then another link leading me to another paper, and it's the same here. So you see, like you create a network of knowledge, and that's exactly what Luhmann was doing. But instead of index cards, now we have Obsidian files that are, easily formatable, searchable, and digital. But that's the same idea, yeah. And instead of these complex indices, we have links, and we don't need the complex indices anymore because it's so like links are much more intuitive, right? And that's, for example, one of the problems why I don't like what is published about Zettelkasten these days, because people are just kind of sticking to this old format, and they have these like massive indices in front of every node. Like, why have that? Just treat it, use it nicely, make it also pretty, make it aesthetically beautiful. Yeah, Obsidian can also be customized to look in a different ways. So we need to now use that tool and create our note-taking system. So to create a system, let's consider this motivation. Yeah, so we read a paper one and it covers certain topics, A, B, C, and D. Yeah, then you read a paper two and it covers certain other topics, and so on and so on. So if you just kind of keep reading your notes, keep reading your papers and taking notes, you will always end up taking 4 notes, one on A, B, C, and D, and then store it kind of alongside with the paper, make your highlights and so on. But as you progress, you see that the topics start repeating, right? Because every scientific paper usually contributes a tiniest sliver of new information, and the rest is just discussion, which puts it into the context of existing information, and introduction, which, if you're an expert already in the field, you can literally skip because it just gives you some background information. So the real contribution is usually very slim. It's usually just one paragraph at the end of the introduction, one paragraph at the end of the discussion, and that's all the contribution. And so we can eliminate that repetition in our notes as well. And that's a key requirement to become efficient with that. So we can even leverage that redundancy by going from notes that are on single papers or lectures or books to notes that are on topics. Yeah, that's the key point. The notes are now on topics. And that's exactly what Luhmann did with his little slip cards. They were exactly on a single topic. And that single topic was something that, was atomic, we call it. So there's nothing that you can take away from it. There's nothing you can add to it. It's just kind of one thing of its own. And for me, that is how it looks. Yeah, you have your sources or source notes. Now they deal maybe with 3 different ideas. Yeah, squares, circles, and diamonds. But the ideas themselves are actually something about circles, something about diamonds, something about squares. So no matter how the different papers mix those 3 concepts, you only have these 3 concepts. So instead of storing this information in the sources, you move to the topics and you make a topic note for each geometric shape here in this idea. But the source notes is still something that we need because it tracks where you got your information from. And when I present you how my actual notes look, you will see that yes, it's absolutely essential because it makes it very easy to when you write a paper and you need to put a reference to a certain idea that you're expressing, that's already what you're doing by creating this source notes. But maybe first let's explore a little bit what a topic note is. And I'll give you this example. So there is a PDF, that's our source. And this PDF consists of a bunch of puzzle pieces of information, something about biodiversity, something about forest resiliency. And these are exactly my topic notes. So biodiversity, forest resiliency, and then a bunch of other things. And these are the ideas that expressed in the paper. So this is the square, this is the circle if you want. And here, note that every bit of information that is in these notes is always linked to a paper. And that is essential because now if I read that thing multiple indices exists to assess it. Yeah, I don't know whether this is true, whether this is my speculation or not, but the link tells me yes, and that has been mentioned in this paper. So I cannot, first of all, I cannot plagiarize anybody because I know I have to cite Boteria 2001. And second of all, I always know where to dig deeper. If I want to see what are these multiple indices that exist to assess it, all I need to do is to open that paper and read it up. And you can do even better than link to papers. You can link to specific sentences inside the PDF. So that's absolutely mind-blowing how cool that works. And of course, you can use then AI on these notes to create a paragraph of your writing. If you're writing about biodiversity, you put this into an AI, which you're also going to do in a second, and you'll see how it transforms it into a piece of writing. So the general process that's happening here is that you take this sequential knowledge that has been transported in a PDF or before that in books, all the way to 1,000 years ago, things were transported in books. It's a very good way to transport information, but it's a very bad way to remember things, because to remember things, we need a network, we need associations. A works with B works with C. From C, I get to, the other concept. It's not something that will be written in a book, because the book will be everything about A, everything about B, everything about C. These are your 3 books, but how are they connected? That's what your brain does. So we go from the sequential structure to the network structure. That is the key. And the ideas, they will be more in the connections than in the single facts. Yeah, because the connections are really the things that are new. And that's exactly what Luhmann was emphasizing with his system, that he had all these links and attributed a lot to this. But to ensure that that actually works, you have to remember that links on topics are really, they need to be on a single topic. They cannot mix topics. So here is an example. I have a note on climate change and a note on deforestation. Yeah, a link between those 2 notes is not very meaningful because it's ambiguous. Yeah, so it can be interpreted in many ways. So is CO2 increase related to soil erosion? Or does the rising temperature cause a loss of biodiversity? You can't really tell, because you actually need 3 notes here and 3 notes here, and then the single links make a lot more sense. So that is the key, to break those topic notes and make them really, really small and maximize the links. Yeah, and the moment that you do that, you actually get into exactly the sphere where your network starts growing, rather than having these big vaults of knowledge. And there's of course a balance between 2 of them. So if you have 2 small notes and too many, it's also very hard to find anything, but there should be a balance. And that's about making notes atomic. So 1 topic only. And you might ask then yourself, okay, now we have these notes. Why do we really need source notes? So I hinted already, they have a good purpose. So source notes, they break down a paper into a series of topic notes. And so once we break down the paper into a series of topic notes, we have to somehow relate back to this source, like where did we learn that? And that's how it can look. I write a paragraph or a small sentence, and then I say, okay, well, that's the paper where I got it from, that's the paper where I got it from, that's the paper where I got it from. So it makes it really easy to track basically where stuff is coming from. But the source notes themselves can be almost empty a lot of the time. I only use them to store, things like methodology and the description of the paper. So something that goes really in depth. And the key idea behind a source note is that it tracks your information. Yeah, because that's something that I feel none of the systems really address that I've looked into, is because you can run into plagiarism if you have a note and you just put it into your writing and you don't know who to attribute it to. So that's what source notes avoid. They avoid unintentional plagiarism. And they also allow you to access the PDFs and the kind of raw information directly, much quicker. And in some cases, I found that they're also a great way to replace your reference manager. So let's look at like what can be stored in such a source note. And stick with me for just 1 more minute, because then I'm going to show it to you how it actually looks. So a source note has a citation key, so that the source, when I link to it, also looks like a real paper. Here, for example, Phi 2017. It has a few properties, like the DOI link that you can copy into tools like Litmaps to explore the citation network, title, authors, year, and you can add the journal and so on. You can add tags to somehow filter and structure your papers. You can add the PDF itself. You can add a little summary of the paper. I really like this idea of putting the author's intention into the source note. So this here we introduce so and so paragraph. So usually kind of the last introduction paragraph, to just put it there so I really can remind myself what that was about. And then there's a few more elements, maybe the key results, maybe the key figure can go, a few things just for me to if I really wanted to focus on that particular paper, I would see all of that. But the majority of ideas that really impact the rest of my research are not stored in this thing. So they are stored inside of a topic note. So let's give it a try. Let's look at these things, how they actually look in Obsidian. We have exactly this 15 minutes for that. So here is a source note on Wyszynski, 2019, a paper that I've been just reading a week ago. And yeah, so we have a summary, we have author's intentions. I describe things like the data set because that was important to me, their hypotheses, which hypotheses they successfully executed, and so on. But more importantly, you'll see this little in links, so they are yellow. And if I hover over that, look what happens. Happens is that the PDF opens in a little pop-up, and it goes directly to the highlight inside the PDF. So here is the idea, is that it's about the hypothesis number one, and so that is exactly where hypothesis number one was mentioned. And here at the top, I link, for example, the title to just the PDF itself, and then I can explore the PDF if I want to. Yeah, so you see that it becomes very easy in Obsidian, at least, to explore things, because you can just hover over a link and suddenly, you get the impact, the insight, and can look into this link. So everything that's green are other topic nodes that you can check. For example, there's simple different traits that have been studied by that study, and I can just go into it and look, okay, well, that was my note on seed mass. And again, you'll find the same structure, something written, and then a paper. Yeah, and so maybe I want to continue the exploration. So again, I hold my command key and I open that, and I go to the source note of this Debouy 2013 paper. And if I want to dig really deep, I hover over the title and I get into the PDF, and I can read up the PDF. So that is absolutely unsurpassed in terms of accessibility to your information, because you basically just hover and suddenly you're 3 papers away. How long would it take you to use pen and paper to find that, and like take your staple of PDFs that you printed out and find that paper? Yeah, it would take you like 3 minutes. That's something that you can do in less than a second here. So it's an incredibly powerful way of organizing stuff with Obsidian. Then the second thing that I would like to show you is a feature called backlinks. Yeah, so you remember at the very beginning I told you that this node A was referring or contradicting node B, but if you were to read node B, you would never know what other nodes refer to it. And that is what's called backlinks. So I want to have all the nodes that are linking to this node rather than the other way around. And Obsidian has that by default. You just click the sidebar, you open it, and there's a little tab for backlinks, and you see all the other nodes that are mentioning this paper here for whatever reason. So the blue ones are always papers, and here's, for example, one that is a date, so that's a progress note, like the one that Nath was suggesting. And there's a bunch of topical notes. So if we, for example, just open each of them, then I can, again, hover very quickly over that, and then the part where this note is mentioned will be yellowed out, or we can click into it and navigate to that part, and here it is. So whether or not, that's doesn't make sense to you right now, the actual content of it, but the idea that, I could find out where this paper was mentioned by just basically one click. So now I'm in this trait environment relationship topic node, which consists of, just a few sentences. And you'll notice that I make the links, there's always like this yellow in and then this blue paper. And that in is a link that links directly into a single sentence of the PDF. So when I go to it, it directs me directly into the paper, into the PDF, so that I can read up whether or not I, for example, understood that correctly and that note is factual. Or I can hover over the blue part myself. Okay, something's, yeah. Or I can hover over the blue part and then I get the whole source note, so the note on the entire paper. So that allows me really to drill deep and to explore deep and also to correct my notes, because quite often I'll take a note and that's actually just not maybe factually true because I wasn't entirely there. Yeah, and you also maybe have the feeling that this trait environment node, it is already a little bit of a literature review. Yeah, so if I were to write something on that topic, all I would need to do is to work this into a paragraph. And if I click the tab for outgoing links, I get all the links that are outgoing, so going from this node to somewhere else. And here I have like a bunch of paper, Young, Funk, Caruso, and so on. So that literally is like a reference list that you have, that you can take together and put it under your literature review on that topic. So it's really cool. I can even, expand Obsidian with things. Here I just made this one little button where I can just open Litmaps with one click directly in Obsidian and start working with it. And you can open any website that you really want. So it's very cool. Secondly, I want to show you, it has, I guess, no practical relevance, but this graph view is something that is just all the nodes that are linked together in that vault and how they connect. So that's really a feature that is not as useful, but just to give you an understanding, like what it means to build such a knowledge network over years. So each blue thing is a paper, each gray thing is a topic node, and I can hover over them and again go into them, go into the single papers, read the papers, go into the PDFs, and just kind of jump around and do everything I want here. So that is incredibly powerful, because you can really just sometimes walk around in your information maze, and that information will, it will slowly do something to your mind, and you will have ideas because you'll stumble upon old notes that you took and kind of old ideas and old papers, and look what you found in this paper, and then suddenly, idea comes up. That's why I call it, it creates ideas on autopilot. It's an incredibly powerful technique. But the last question here is maybe, where is AI and all of that? So I want to show you very quickly one plugin how we can add AI to Obsidian. So you can, so there's, if you go to the effortlessacademic.com/litmaps, and you'll find these two images, and you can click on them and you'll get to the different parts of them, to the blog post. Yeah, so Copilot is just a plugin that allows me to do two things. So one of them is to just find relevant other nodes. So that's the semantic search that we've been talking about. So here AI will look for everything that is semantically related, but not necessarily linked to this node, and will give me a list of these things. And I can start, exploring them, and it even gives a little bit of a score. So here's 78%, 83%, 76%. So like how similar a different node is. That part runs completely offline. But more interesting would be to ask the AI to start working on these nodes. And so I'll just copy this little prompt here. And here I'm asking to summarize, and I can add a link to the trait environment relationship and keep all the references to academic papers. Yeah, and we can just run that. So now what's going to happen is it's going to send all that information off to ChatGPT with all the different contexts, and it will create a piece of writing that is a little bit like a first paragraph for your literature review, but it will do things like the node on the trait environment relationship discusses. So that's not something that you can necessarily use in your writing. So instead, what I do is, and that's this other blog post, is I create a blueprint or a style blueprint for how I want the AI to write. And that's just one paragraph of text that I can just copy and paste. So you can create this paragraph of text either manually, or you can take some paper, some manuscript of yours, analyze it with a specific prompt, and then you will generate this piece of text. So that's something that you can learn in this blog post. And I'll just put it here. And so the blueprint consists of just a statement: write a formal, authoritative tone, ensuring precision and depth in scientific argumentation, blah, blah, blah. Just basically telling the AI how to write that article. And the result is much more akin to an actual part of your publication. So the relationship between plant functional traits and environment is a cornerstone of ecological research, and so on. It contains all the different papers linked. And yeah, that I feel is already a very good first draft for your writing, right? So that is the beauty of taking notes, because all the critical thinking happens with me, but the AI uses this to create the writing and like take all this unnecessary, tedium of writing, thinking about how to write academic English. Like so many people struggle with that. That part is going to be replaced. I completely agree, but not the content. And the content comes from your notes and the AI working on them, in my opinion. So here's the last part, is these argument notes. So they synthesize information. So for example, here's our research still on the different shapes. And we write an argument that only 3 shapes are known. Yeah, the square, the circle, and the diamond. However, a square is not a circle, but a square is similar to a diamond. So we conclude there are actually only 2 shapes of, 2 types of shapes, right? So that's something I could publish, yeah, in this hypothetical example. And that's what arguments note do. And they can have many different forms. So in my case, I very often have these outlines where I write about something. And I try to link all the relevant papers, and then at the end, I can generate a reference list that's automatically generated by Obsidian if you use a plugin called DataView, and it gives you like all the papers that we're using. Or it can also have the form of a question. So argument notes are basically any way that you can combine the findings of your research. And that's also there's a little bit of an art to it, how to do these argument notes and how to organize everything, because Obsidian kind of only starts here. Yeah. So this is the absolute bare bones of the note-taking system. But in terms of project management, organization, and so on, you can get so much out of Obsidian. Like I can't tell you how much it transformed my career. Like for example, one idea that I always use are these massive mind maps of my research. Yeah, so I'm researching, and I usually have progress notes going from left to right. Here's February, here's 20th of February, and then the plots that I've been doing and the conclusions that I've been drawing from all these plots. And that helps me really remember like what I've been doing. So that's what Nath was referring to, as it's incredibly motivational to see your progress in that way, but also to organize yourself, because this has much more function. If I need, for example, that particular plot for the publication that I'm working on, then I know that the file where I generated it is called trade distributions. Right, so that's a fairly easy way of tracking your stuff. And so I've been doing that for quite a few iterations now. So there's different projects, they all kind of resulted in different papers. That helps me organize stuff. I can organize bigger projects that are more sense-based. It looks chaotic like here. And the idea here is to kind of pursue an idea. So from each idea, I have 5 other ideas. Is that work? Does that work? Does that work? Okay, this doesn't work. This works, and so on. So you kind of, navigate and structure your progress in general. So Obsidian is very, very powerful like that. And there's a lot of things that you can kind of learn to use. And I have created a bunch of courses also about it. I'm going to pitch them to you in a second. But yeah, maybe like just the summary of the note-taking system is that we have 3 types of notes: source, the topic, the argument note. Source tracks where you learned something and maybe some details about the paper, but not much more. The topic tracks what you learned, so that's the actual meat, and always links back to the source. And argument notes are any notes combining or synthesizing existing knowledge. And Obsidian is the substrate on which all of that grows. Yeah, and just a few rules for you to remember. Always connect new nodes to at least 3+ existing nodes. That ensures that your network is connected enough to find things easily. maximize the number of links, not the number of notes or the length of notes, and especially avoid any sort of highlighting and copying these highlights into your notes. I think that's a way of procrastinating, really. You feel like you're doing something, you're not getting anything into your mind. And lastly, use PDF highlights, really as evidence for your writing. So I showed you these little links where I can immediately go into the specific sentence of the PDF. So that's the only way that I find permissible for highlighting PDFs. So I'm very sparing with this. And yeah, most importantly, keep your topic notes always atomic. So very, very simple. Well, that was my presentation on notes. I hope you could get something out of it. And if you're curious about it, of course, I can't tell you everything in 15 minutes. So I have a 9-hour course in note taking and Obsidian use. I have 4 webinars, each 3 hours long, on literature review and how you can find the right papers. And here, Litmaps is the absolute cornerstone of research, because AI is just not great for finding papers at the moment. It can find you, like in my experience, sometimes very obscure papers. I found one lately that seemed all right, but then it was written entirely in Mandarin from a Chinese journal. And I couldn't even read the paper, even though the AI found it for me. But then I read it with ChatGPT, so it translated the gist of it for me. So that was really funny. But yeah, AI does these type of things where it's really hard for you to gauge the importance of papers, and that's the only tool that can do that is actually Litmaps, in my opinion. So that's why I kind of advertise it. And the AI literature review is just finding the most impactful papers and not wasting your time reading everything. Note taking is about what we talked about now, and a little bit more about organization, more details, more examples, and so on. And the newest one is writing with AI. So I just pitched you like this little part of it where we wrote basically one paragraph, but there's of course much more that you can do with that, and many more little techniques and ways of writing and helping you with writing, so that the writing process becomes easy, the sense making process becomes easy, the finding process becomes easy, and these 3 courses together, they form the basis of what I've learned over the last 3 or so years. And yeah, you'll find all of that on, again, effortlessacademic.com/litmaps. And yes, thank you so much for your presence and for listening to me for so long. And that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Ilya. That was so great, very comprehensive, and yet at the same time, I think we're getting just the surface level of all these different methods and topics and how to do them. And as you were talking, we were definitely getting some great questions. So if any questions have come up for you while you listened, please put them in the chat. We have still 10 minutes where we can, answer anything, I guess, about the note taking or anything that was covered here in the last hour. But I also noticed as you were talking, a question that has come up today and yesterday several times is folks have been asking, like, what tool or method can we use when they are actively writing and they want to cite something, and to kind of make that connection between what you're writing right now and the thing you want to cite. And like, where did I see it in that paper, or where did I make that note? And so like kind of auto finding their citations. And although there is, of course, writing assistants that try to automate that, I think in the very first slides here, this is also what the system does, because when we're taking the notes and the notes have the citations, and as you saw like about 30 minutes ago, when Ilya hovered over the citation, can instantly see the PDF with the highlights inside of it. So when you're writing the paper, you right away know, okay, look, this is the citation I use, this is the paper, and this is where in the paper it talked about that. So maybe making connection from A to B without actually even using a fully automated AI process, which is not actually ideal, because whatever you're taking these notes and you're writing it up, you actually would have read this paper anyways. So using your own knowledge, but accessing it very fast. So that seemed like a very good use case as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, finding citations for single, really recalcitrant sentences is, I think, a really big challenge. And yes, I use my own notes, but I also use AI tools for that. So you can, even go to your Vault and use that Copilot tool and just kind of search your Vault for specific ideas. You can, throw in papers into Litmaps, find similar papers that might answer a question. You can use things like consensus or size space. But yeah, everything has pros and cons. But I feel, the surest way is exactly like you're saying, Marina, is to have it in your notes and to know exactly, okay, that was the particular part of the annotation that I'm referring to in that sentence.
Yes, that seems really easy and very fast compared to doing this manually, which I think is how I did it maybe 5 or so years ago. But yes, and another question that came up several times, and there's some great, awesome researchers also posting in the chat giving their advice, but it's about Obsidian specifically. So obviously you're having some courses, but are there any other beginner courses you would recommend for the person starting completely from scratch to do Obsidian for their research?
Yeah, I think Mick Milo does a really good job at explaining Obsidian with incredible simplicity. It's called like Obsidian for Beginners, but YouTube is filled with Obsidian courses. Just none of them are like specific for academics, I would say. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can find just on YouTube and start experimenting. But if you just remember that Obsidian is a browser, then you will already have a good understanding of how it works. And then, of course, you have to learn Markdown, which is the type of formatting that Obsidian uses. So, for example, a link is actually like a two square bracket, and that's always how a link is in Markdown. And there are other things, like a header, for example, is something that has a hashtag, and if it's like multiple hashtags, it's like smaller titles. So you have to know this a little bit, but it's not super complicated. But then just play around, and you'll be fine. And then you'll be always excited, discovering new little things that you can do with Obsidian. And there's literally like hundreds, if not no, thousands of plugins that do all kinds of really interesting, funky stuff. But yeah, Nick Milo I can really recommend this Obsidian stuff.
Great, thank you. I think that's very helpful for everyone. And I also have another question here. Have you tried using AI agents for note-taking, like new deep research features with the large language models, and then to do your literature review writing?
Yeah, so deep research is absolutely phenomenal. I was just writing an article about it yesterday. So there's ChatGPT's deep research generates 7,000 words of lit review, but only cites 6 papers, so that's questionable. SciSpace generates like 70 papers, but only writes 1,000 words on it. So they're all both have like pros and cons. And as I said, the thing is, I think AI cannot really fully differentiate between impactful papers and just papers roughly related semantically to a certain topic. And that's what very often leads to you having these sources that, like in my case, that were written in Mandarin. I could never, cite that paper because I can't read that paper. So why does AI kind of give it to me? So I think that's a key thing with these deep research tools. They're great at this, let's say, to penetrate the first 50% of the problem. But then when you want to go all the way to the core, that's where you will start reading and writing and making notes. And, AI kind of penetrates deeper and deeper into the problem. But I doubt that it will ever get to this 100% where I can just put it in and boof, done is my literature review. That's just, it will not be critical. It will be a summary. So it will be at best, working for your introduction, but never ever for your discussion. Like that's at least my opinion from, working with these tools daily, that I can't see that happening just yet. Not with deep research either, even though it's an absolutely incredible technology.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. And I think something else people are very interested in, because we were talking about it as well, but someone's asking to know how you built this kind of in link to the specific segments in the PDF. So I think this thing you're kind of demoing here,
Yeah.
when you highlight and you see the PDF with this highlights.
Yes, is a bit tricky, but yeah, if you just go, I should have put maybe the link. So just go to the blog and then find this post on PDF plus plus, working with PDFs and Obsidian, PDF plus plus plugin and full text search. So that's where I think I describe how to do these in links. Yeah, just browse through it and yeah, look at it. Yeah.
And this is probably the kind of thing that first you would need to know how to use Obsidian before doing
Yeah,
this.
that's a bit of an advanced feature, of course. Yeah. So like don't start with these complicated things. I always say you should start like Occam's razor, right? That's the foundation of science. Always the simplest solution works best, or the simplest explanation is best. The same here. Start with an absolute barbaric, stupid setup where you have just text and maybe a link every once in a while, and then from there build it and make it complicated. Because I'm showing you the end result of like 4 years of using it, maybe not four, but like 3 years maybe using it. It's not gonna look like this for you at the beginning, and that's okay because this will be completely overwhelming, and I understand that. So it will be much simpler when you start doing it yourself, and you can just take little bits and pieces from wherever you find it, and yeah, make it into your own system. Because that's what I see also with my students, that they come up with their own ideas, how to do it, because there's something is very important to them. It's like, why is that important to you? Why do you need that? But somehow it makes a lot of sense for them, and they build it this way. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
I think this is all the questions we have so far. So I don't see anything else coming up. Is there any final thing you want to share with everyone in this last minute?
No, I think I've said everything I want. Thank you so much for
Right.
joining. You're a very, very good host as always, and I really appreciate the invitation here. And yeah, thanks everybody also for listening.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. And yeah, in the follow-up email, we'll have link, of course, to all the speakers. And so don't worry if you forget any of this content, like we'll still send afterwards. But yes, thank you again, Ilya. Thank you for the presentation. And thank you everyone for your questions and participation throughout it. It's been very good. Mhm. And now we will transition to the final section. So this is our kind of summary wrap-up time. If, of course, you have a late time zone or you need to head out for any reason, don't worry. The last section here, we're just concluding the event, kind of going through a summary of everything we covered and offering basically a large amount of time for questions. So I think Ilya may still stick around for additional note-taking questions. And we also have us here from Litmaps. So I'll do some additional introductions in just a second. But in the meantime, I just wanted to share some final slides to do a quick summary of everything we covered in the past 2 days. Mhm. Okay, well, whether you were here for maybe just the past few minutes or you joined us even yesterday, this is all that we covered. So hopefully you could have joined for, one talk, maybe more, maybe all of them. But we got through a lot. And so just to recap kind of from the start, really the whole idea of that Future Ready Scholar Conference is really in the name there. We want to think about research is changing so quickly with so many AI tools, with traditional databases transforming, with huge amounts of publications coming out and all the other challenges we mentioned yesterday at the very first talk. Given all these transformations, how do we change? How do we change how we do research? How do we make it more productive? How do we actually scale with the problems as they're scaling? And so to dive into that, yesterday was really focused on AI. We talked a lot about AI, in particular, some great and interesting AI tools to try out in research. So that started out with the first talk of the day in AI and innovation, reviewing some interesting tools like GPT, Excel, so a way to speed up Excel use, Notebook LM, which a lot of you seem to have a lot of interest in. It's a really powerful way to take a paper and listen to a podcast on it. It's really novel, and it's just, I think, the epitome of modern AI tools in how incredibly impressive it is, and it is useful, but it still doesn't replace any of our work, right? It's kind of offering something new. So it was a very cool application. And then the second part of the day, we really heard from Dr. Nake here from Canada, who thought about AI and AI tools in a much broader way. And that's what he does in his newsletters and in his work and his research, but thinking not just about how do we use the latest AI tools, how do we work faster, but as probably many of you are here thinking about, is like, how do we do this responsibly? And, with this quickly evolving landscape, how do we actually maintain our academic integrity? And what will we even be doing in 5 years, given how quickly these processes are automated? So he had some great kind of big picture thinking around these topics. And there were some very interesting and illuminating discussions around that. And we wrapped up the day thinking about tools in the broad sense. So everything from landscape of AI tools, what tools you all are using, as well as large databases. And I tried to offer a kind of evaluation strategy for how we can think about tools, because if we learned anything, I think yesterday, or even just being in this space for as long as you've been here, you can feel that there's just so much information and so many tools. There's no way to, efficiently learn every single one or even know which ones are relevant. There's genuinely that much information out there. So instead, the best thing I think we can do is that whenever we come across a tool, we come across a new method, is having our own evaluation strategy. How do I know it's reliable? How do I know what data it's using, the algorithm? And of course, can I have a way to check these answers? Do I have a way to stay up to date? I kind of had a set of questions there we could go through, and we went through that process with Litmaps. Today, we focused much more, I think, on the ground of research. So still trying to, in a sense, future-proof our work, but in a very applied way. So of course, in the morning, I spoke about Litmaps and using Litmaps to accelerate the literature review process. Nath shared with us a really great PhD plan. So a really comprehensive approach to thinking about your PhD and not just limited to the work, right? Also thinking about work-life balance, and along with his colleague, his peer, thinking about the whole picture whenever you plan any research project, really. But considering well-being as a part of the PhD. And Ilya continued on with the, say, applied work with talking about note-taking, which we just finished up on, and likely just about everyone who's here right now probably heard in detail, so I won't get too into the details. But I'd love to take just about 30 seconds or a minute and hear from you all. I mean, I know we have now around 100 viewers, and at the peak, we had sometimes 400. So you guys really have stuck it out. You've listened to a lot of the talks, you've heard a lot, and I'd love to hear from you. What was your biggest takeaway? Whether you just heard only Ilya's talk or you're here for all 2 days, what have you really, what made this attendance maybe worth it? What tool or idea or concept you're really glad that you can walk away with? Maybe even something you want to really share now with your students or your colleagues or your advisor, or something you want to change because you got to hear about it. So if you can, please drop it in the chat for us, and we'd love to go through that. And moreover, it's also interesting for everyone else to see, because with such a varied audience, like we said, we have around 53% graduate students, and the rest of this audience we're all split right between academics, maybe some senior researcher, undergraduates, librarians, teachers, professors, so people from all backgrounds, and it's great to see what you all took away from the event. So please drop it in the chat. We'll have about 30 seconds, a minute to see the responses come in. And then I can go ahead and cover the final topics before we get into your questions. Okay, thank you also for your thank yous in response to us and Ilya and the conference. I appreciate that very much in the chat. Many kind words here. But just going through also some of your responses regarding, what is the key takeaway you're having from this event? So Marie is sharing, just to have learned about Litmaps through the PhD place. You love the two women, this was Thesis for You, who presented yesterday on different, they not only gave you useful tools, they gave you hope. That's great to hear. Another person shared that we now know how to automate the process in an ethical way. This is really actually probably a very good summary of what we're trying to do in general when we future-proof our research, right? Because, and this is something Ilya touched on with looking at even, note-taking over hundreds of years, looking at history, it's always been about automating, being more efficient and using the tools. But yeah, using this in the responsible and the ethical way, this is where the rub comes in, and that's where it becomes challenging. And so I'm glad we can address that here. Someone else had 2 takeaways, using Litmaps for literature review. Awesome to hear. And the importance of note-taking and good organization and knowledge. Yes, both very, very important, and kind of timeless, really useful stuff. Benny is sharing we'll be a lot better off if we take the time to have an AI strategy and a good network in our PhD and choosing which webinars or newsletters to join. Thank you so much, Benny. That's also great to hear. And some other comments about the community and being supported, not feeling alone. Someone else just liked to learn about the tool size space. So I could go through these, but please go ahead and keep posting these. Don't mind if we're not reading all of them out loud. It's wonderful to see. And just as a note, in general, with YouTube Live, all these chats, they continue to be live when people rewatch the recordings. So it's also offering that kind of knowledge and those takeaways to whoever reads or watches that in the future. It's very useful information for everyone. Okay, so I'll quickly go over Litmaps, a couple of special Litmaps offers, and then I'll introduce you to a couple team members, and then we'll dive into questions. Because this was, of course, a Litmap sponsored event, and you've probably heard the word Litmaps about 20 times in the last 2 days. But that's for good reason, because we are, of course, the sponsors, but also we want to make sure that you walk away with something really valuable. You're getting all these valuable talks and insights. This is just a quick summary again of what the point of Litmaps is, how it helps you with literature review. But that's also something I want to touch on, that if you walk away and you're like, actually, yeah, this is a really useful tool for me. I'm glad I know about it, as one person shared. Then I also want you to know what kind of access you have, right? So everyone knows we have a free platform. You can create your free account, use the platform for free forever. It's no problem. But if you're on the app and you want to use more advanced features, more advanced search, build bigger maps, kind of manage your whole literature review without any limitations, then you're going to want to consider Litmaps Premium plan. And if you do so, we're having a special offer, of course, for the conference. So for everyone here, a 40% off license. And so just as background, by default, everyone affiliated with an educational facility, if you're in a university, you automatically get 75% off always. So that's already happening. This is another 40% off of that, just to give an additional discount as a thank you for signing up, a thank you for attending the conference and considering research from this big picture perspective. And hopefully, yeah, presenting to you Litmaps in a really useful and actionable way. So use this FRSC 40. It will end very soon in 2 days, because it's just for you, it's just for conference attendees. So I will email it also if you don't remember the code, but you have very limited time to use that. So play around with the app the next couple of days, see if you want to use that. And I also want to note, if you are from a country that may be considered lower middle income country, so these countries, and there's dozens of them in the world, many, many countries, you can also qualify for an additional discount. And if you use that, it's likely it will even be larger than the one I am doing through the conference. And that discount is always there. So even if 2 months from now you want to sign up for Litmaps, when you go through the process, you will automatically see your local pricing. So wherever you are physically located, whatever country you're in, you don't have to ask or worry. You just can log in, click on the Upgrade to Litmaps Pro button. You don't need to buy it, but when you click on the button, you'll instantly see this box if you are eligible. So for example, country like this, we have an example of New Zealand. New Zealand is actually not covered. That's just an example. But if you're in a country that is eligible, you will see your percentage discount, and you can use that immediately when you check out all the time. Just keeping in mind, you can't combine that with additional discounts, because the point is we're already doing parity pricing. So just a note here to keep in mind, we definitely do country discounts for everyone. So for the final part, we have a bunch of time to do questions, 20 minutes. And before we dive in, I'd love to introduce you all to 2 more Litmaps folks that we have with us today, which is so great, because oftentimes, whoever is working on the app, they're often behind the scenes, and we don't always get to meet them. But here I have Axton, our CEO, and Diggle, who is our product lead or design lead. These are kind of the master builders behind Litmaps, and they'll help me to answer any of the questions you will have today as well. So don't be shy to ask really complex questions about the algorithms. We have all the experts here to help you. So yeah, go ahead and please say hi. It's great to have you both.
Hey everyone, yeah, great to participate in this, and yeah, really enjoyed watching the conference so far.
And hi from me. My name is Diggle. I'm designer, developer for Litmaps. Amazing work, Marina. Thank you so much for hosting this, and amazing work to all of our speakers. Very, very grateful for you to share your experiences from actually doing it. Research is very hard, and we hope that we can make it easier. But it's critical for us to see the ways that you use the tools that are available to improve your research. Yeah. And thank you for everyone watching as well. Um, you're obviously all doing good things for the world, and it's great that we can support you. And if we can support you in any other way, please let us know. Or if you have any questions about Litmaps, ask away. Marina, did you have some like pre-canned questions or anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely will be plenty of questions anyways, but yeah, I can certainly come up with some. But thanks for mentioning that, because that does remind me to let everyone know, if we don't have time for anything today, and that probably applies to every speaker you've heard here, that you can go on the website and contact them. It doubly applies to Litmaps, because you see here we have CEO and the product lead. We're a very accessible tool. So regardless of whether you're paid or a free member or whatever your background is, if you're using the application, if you have ideas or requests or questions about the database, anything like that, please easily contact us. We are very ground level and very connected to the users. So you just go to litmaps.com, the contact page. If you're on the app, you'll find a way to contact us through the app. So just a side note, anything we don't get to today, or if you're watching this recording in the future, you can always access us like that. And yeah, in terms of questions, let me dive into the chat here and see what's happening. We actually had a bunch of Litmaps questions earlier that I didn't have time to answer anyways, so I can always go back to those. But in the meantime, I have a great question from Mark here, if maybe either of you want to try it, but it's about comparing and contrasting Scite and Litmaps. And that might go for any other tool in general, but especially Scite. And are they complementary?
I can answer this one. I don't know if I'm going to break any confidentiality clauses here, but I'm just going to go for it. So recently we've been talking with the people at site for a while, just to build a relationship, and we're all just trying to help scientists, right? So learning from each other and trying to see what each other are doing. So we did an experiment where we actually tried some of their technology within Litmaps. So we're very, very keen on site. We think their tool is really cool, the smart citations tool that they have. They also have a very good AI assistant. I think all of the AI assistants are useful, but should definitely be verified against something that's a bit more based in the literature, like Litmaps. So yeah, the smart citation tool is really interesting. For those of you who don't know, what you can do is look at a paper, and you can look at all of the things that it references and some of the things that reference it. And what Scite will do, it will qualify those citations as being supporting or mentioning or contrasting. So good, ambivalent, or not good. And it's a really important idea that we don't just look at the citation count as a good thing across the board, because some of those citations could be, conflicting with what you've said in your paper. So yeah, we were playing with ways of representing that on the litmap, and we think that there's hopefully something we can do with them in future, but no promises. But yeah, you can definitely hop between Litmaps and Scite to make sure that the articles that you're finding in Litmaps, you're finding because they are cited in a positive view.
Yeah, great summary. Yeah, thank you, Diggle. And this is also a question from Ilya, who we all know, but are you guys planning a reference manager anytime soon? It would be so cool to open papers inside Litmaps, which we can also say we have tagging, but if you have any comments.
I can speak to that one as well. We talk about this a lot. I'm sure appreciate that we have a lot of things on our list of things that we would love to build and do for people. We're a very small team. We try our best to make the best tools we can for everyone. But at the end of the day, we have a certain amount of time that we can use to develop things. Doing reference manager things is absolutely on our list. I can't tell you how high it is on our list, but we would love to get there at some point. And that's why we have things like these Zotero integrations, so that for now you can use your Zotero and you can sync it with Litmaps. So as you're adding things to your Zotero, you can use things like monitored Litmaps to keep up to date with the literature in the background. One day we would definitely love to remove that sync step entirely as well. But yeah, I can't make any promises for the foreseeable future, but just know that we are thinking the same thing. We think it would be really, really cool.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
to
Yeah. Oh, go
just to
ahead.
add on to that, I think knowing exactly what parts of the reference management flow that people really want to have is important. So reference managers have a lot of features and they do a lot of things. So just knowing what's the most important, whether it's citation tools when you're writing or whether it's storing all your papers. So that's really great to know as well. So we can prioritize those sorts of features.
Mm. Yes, yes, absolutely. And that's why it's always helpful to hear from everyone. If you're ever in Litmaps and you get the survey, please fill it out. It tells us exactly what you need and want, and we can build it then. But we have another comment. That's not really a question, but it's interesting. It's about the fact that perhaps Litmaps should start detecting predatory journals or papers, also probably referring to retractions and things, that actually citations are no longer an indication of quality and impact. Is there anything we can say on this right now?
Yeah, I'll chime in. It's a massive space. Obviously, research integrity is a big thing, and we're seeing papers published that are generated by AI, or people having citation cartels where they, are getting up to lots of bad things in that space. So I guess that quality angle and understanding what are the patterns here and what are the signals that really show is this trustworthy and relevant. So I think that's a big thing for the whole industry to battle with, and we're going to play our part in the visualization and sort of helping understand this, and we can over time help integrate that. But I think it's a really massive challenge for the whole space.
Mm. Absolutely, yeah. It's something that's not limited to us. It's a universal problem, and it's something I think that's ongoing and a very good point. And I think that's a great takeaway from the conference overall, is that this is the challenges we all need to be aware of, so we can know what biases come up no matter what tool we're using. And Mark here had a question actually for Ilya, if Ilya is still around. And it's about a pretty specific thing, but probably useful for many people who have large literature libraries. So if you have gone pretty far in your research and you have a lot of literature, a lot of papers, he's asking, I have about 20,000 papers in macOS app bookends with light notations. Is there an established way to import into Obsidian, which is actually new for him? But in general, this could be a good question to think about, that, if you have a large library, is it better to leave my system how it is, or how can I port that into an efficient strategy into a place like Obsidian?
Okay, I'll just comment very quickly. So I don't know about bookends, but if that would be Zotero, there's a plugin called Zotero Integration that can pull all the annotations inside the PDFs and all the metadata and can create notes in Obsidian. But if you create 20,000 notes in Obsidian, I'm pretty sure it's going to go to its knees. So I think, there should be some filtering involved, and I wouldn't know how you get 20,000 up here. That's probably the bigger problem. But there is a way to at least go from Zotero. But from bookends, I don't think there is, unless it uses some standard format like BibTeX or something like that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's a big one. That's very challenging. Yeah, certainly you can also expand on your system, and maybe that can be a great follow-up directly to Ilya or anyone else in that space, because that's clearly like a very big project. But I also had some questions earlier. I mean, please feel free to keep asking. We have just 10 minutes left, and then we're going to wrap up the conference. But I have a couple of questions from earlier in the day about Litmaps. These are going to be more on the ground, like very databasey. But one person asked, like, about our database and relevance to something like ResearchGate? Like, can I guess we access papers on Litmaps the way we can access them on ResearchGate, or maybe what's like our relative coverage compared to a site like that? What can we recommend there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll try and take this. So obviously a lot of ResearchGate is user uploaded, so authors putting papers up that they've published or sharing with their community. So a lot of those papers should be indexed in uh, other places where we index our data. So hopefully if they're published somewhere, they'll show up. If they're just someone's paper, they won't be in our tool. And so you'd have to use like custom paper connections in our own tool. So you can say, this is what is the version of this paper, and maybe sort of have a way of representing it, but we won't have a way of indexing it because it's only published on their personal website or they've uploaded it to ResearchGate. So yeah, there's a bit tricky around user generated content like that, but if it is part of archive or a preprint server, we do index some of those locations as well. So it will depend on where else that paper lives, but ResearchGate itself, we don't index.
Mhm. Yes, that sounds good. And there's another one, also pretty specific, maybe it's also relevant to Exen, but how does Litmaps compare to ProQuest? I'm actually not so sure myself about ProQuest.
Yeah, I don't have all the details about ProQuest. I think, yeah, there's, I don't know if they're a content repository or they're sort of a platform for searching across content. I think they're more on the latter. But yeah, I'd have to do my research and get back to you on that one.
Yeah, I think from a quick view, it's definitely kind of a bit of like a database lookup type style site. So although we need to explore in more detail what it is exactly on the surface level, often the distinction between Litmaps and most other tools tends to be like the kind of unique set of features that are covering a big chunk of the literature review process. So just as a summary statement, even if it's not relevant for your comparison, probably they're complementary. That would be the default answer, like you can use both. But in general, we're trying to cover a lot of the literature review process, like having a comprehensive database, searching for these papers, looking through them efficiently, building out visual literature maps. That's extremely unique to Litmaps, and actually annotating these maps, coloring them, adding labels, exporting these, putting them in published works, like all these different steps. And sorry, staying up to date, that's also a key. So all these different steps, combining them and putting them in one app, it's the only app that does all that. So there's other apps that do different parts of this process in different ways, but that's often my default answer for what's the difference between Litmaps and X. That if this particular set of features and going through the literature review process in this way sounds useful, then that's what Litmaps offers that is going to be very different than everything else, like in this whole, you could say, streamlined approach, as well as kind of more niche things, right? Citation searching and so on. If anything else comes to mind, please bring it up. And there's two more Litmaps questions, so I think we do have time for these as well. Someone's asking pretty nice niche question. I think they're an active Litmaps user, but they're asking if they get duplicates, presumably duplicate articles showing up in Litmaps, and the citation numbers are different, what should I do?
Yeah, I can answer this. So this does happen from time to time. Thank you, Taylor, for this question. So part of this is stemming from the difficulty of indexing from multiple different databases. So what we do is we ingest articles from a place like OpenAlex and a place like Semantic Scholar, and we mix them all together. And so that way we have the most complete database that we can possibly represent. Sometimes the disambiguation between two articles will get mixed up, and we'll show you two articles that look pretty much the same. So this does happen from time to time. If you find one, just message the support chat, and we'll flag it, and we'll have our database engineers looking into where the error might have come from. And is this a similar issue with the citation numbers? So sometimes we won't have all of the records that are actually cited by a particular article. And so in those cases, our citation count will be a little bit lower than it is otherwise available. We're always looking to improve this. But if you see something that's dramatically lower, then again, just message the support. We see fewer and fewer of those. but we are always looking to improve the way that we index our data and store it and present it to you. So it's really useful for us to hear when you find cases like that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for answering that. Yeah, it's very important. And yeah, citation counts in general are fun across apps, across databases. There's different ways people calculate them, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of stuff going on in the background. So that's a
And
great
they
thing.
also change over time, which is quite tricky. Because as new articles are published and they cite previous articles, the citation counts will naturally inflate. And we do account for that. So as an article lives longer and longer and more articles cite it, its citation count will go up. But it can change when you have complications like versions, which are another piece of the puzzle. So if someone updates their article with a new version, or an article goes from preprint to published, um, which of those articles is technically being cited can be quite a difficult thing to make decisions around. So again, we have internal processes to try and figure out what the citation count should truly be. But that is why you will see some variance in Litmaps' database against other databases.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. And there's another good Litmaps question here as well, asking kind of perhaps maybe how to do this, or is it possible, but using Litmaps to find the most influential authors in a specific topic. So in particular for interdisciplinary fields, but just in general, maybe the author search comes up here.
Yeah, I can try and answer this one. So
Yeah.
essentially, I think it's maybe a way of thinking about this problem. So we've got the papers and the authors behind them, and we've got the specific search algorithm that's looking at how are these authors working together behind those papers. So one thing you could try is look at, here's some papers in those two fields, and use that co-authorship search to find out who are the authors that are working commonly together behind those papers. That's
Mhm.
one way I would suggest, and that maybe lends interdisciplinary kind of approach. Otherwise, I think, maybe looking at the top papers that you see, diving through the authors and looking at who else is authoring papers with them. That's probably the way I'd suggest.
We also have a very, I'm going to get in trouble for telling you guys of the cool things we're working on, but we have a very cool tool that's coming out. I can't tell you when, but it is to do with figuring out what the most influential authors are in a field. I'll shut up or else I'll get absolutely told off after this call. But yeah, stay posted. We're working on stuff all the time, and it's really great to see your ideas like this because it validates the stuff that we're working on. So please continue to prod us with your ideas. This is really, really useful stuff.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. Very exciting things coming. And we get another comment here. It's not a question, but it's a great comment that someone looked up 3 topics relevant to their research and they got over 4 million citations. So just even though I guess I mean maybe perhaps in a summary fashion, or perhaps I mean like when you just do a database lookup, getting thousands of results, which often means that's kind of the goal of Litmaps, is that instead of looking through all these database results, it's trying to identify just a few papers from which to enter the literature. So don't worry about covering everything immediately, just finding a few relevant papers and creating the lit map from there, kind of how I demoed a couple hours ago. And this flow makes it much simpler strategy than trying to tackle thousands of results, which you'll get almost invariably probably in every database because of how much literature there is. It's one of the core problems we keep coming back to. Okay, but so far I think I mean, there's probably always going to be a couple more questions and comments that we don't quite have time for, but I think we got mostly to everything. Is there any final words you'd like to share, Axon and Diggle, before we kind of say farewell?
I just want to say I'm really excited about this event. It's been great to see all the energy and enthusiasm of the talks. So yeah, really great to observe from afar and welcome everyone to the community. And yeah, looking forward to everyone trying the tool and giving feedback, and we love to hear that. So thanks a lot.
And I would just like to extend an offer to get in touch with us. As I mentioned, we're a small team. We're working to try and make science better and make sure that you can do the work to help the world that you're trying to do. So our inboxes are very much open. Send us messages on the in-app chat or send us messages through our contact form on our website. We love to hear your ideas. We love to hear what you're up to. Yeah, please get in touch.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, seconded and thirded. Thank you so much, Diggle, and thank you, Axton. It's great that you can join and that everyone can meet you guys because, of course, yeah, sometimes when you're behind the tool, you don't always get to see each other. So it's great to make these connections and for everyone to know just how accessible we definitely are. So thank you so much for all the help and for answering the questions. And for everyone else, thank you so much for attending, whether you were here for 10 minutes or I'm seeing the average view length is around 40 minutes. So whatever amount of time you joined us for, thank you so much. Thanks for participating. And thanks if you shared the event with somebody else. Even though the event is over, you can still absolutely share it. There will be recordings for all of these. We may even be able to annotate and streamline the recordings to make them more digestible for future listeners. But all this is to say that we're really excited to be able to host this kind of event to bring a lot of valuable insights and talks to everyone. And hopefully we can do something like this again in the future. And if so, if you like this kind of event, even if you are not a literature review part of your research, still, I highly recommend signing up for Litmaps and opting into our newsletter, which will alert you of events like this. So we do a lot of events, we do a lot of webinars. A big part of us creating a good tool is by knowing what research community needs, and to know what the community needs, we make events to learn and to be in touch. So if you like it, please sign up. Just create a free account, sign up for the newsletter, and you will learn about that. And feel free to share with your colleagues, your students, and so on. But that about wraps up this event. So thank you again, and we'll be in touch shortly with a follow-up for everything we've covered, as well as that exciting promo code and other offers from the event. Thank you so much, everyone.